He woke up with his cheek pressed against a cold stone and realized three things at once. Two suns hung above him instead of one. 3 meters away, a girl with a sword had just hacked a green goblin to pieces. And in the corner of his vision, a blue icon was flashing in the very font he had recommended to a colleague 6 months ago for the admin panel. Someone had built this world like a program, and the program was already crashing. But let's take it one step at a time. The first thing to burst into Han Doyun's consciousness wasn't light, but a smell. The wrong smell. Not office dust, not the plastic of a keyboard, not the cooled-down energy drink on the table. It smelled of hay, smoke, and something metallic, like blood. Doyun opened his eyes and immediately regretted it. 2 suns hung above him, the familiar yellow one, and the second, smaller, reddish, as if someone had forgotten to remove it after the render. He blinked. There were still 2 suns. He sat down. Under his palms was old cobblestone, with cracks and moss in the joints. He'd only seen this in historical dramas and fantasy games. There's nothing like this anywhere in Seoul. He looks at his hands. His hands. Skinny. A callus from the mouse on his right middle finger. A scar on his thumb from that time he cut a mango with a butter knife. His hands. Only they're dirty. And right then, a blue icon flashes in the lower right corner of his vision. Doyun freezes. The font is painfully familiar, the very one he'd recommended to a colleague 6 months ago for the admin panel interface. He glances at the icon, and a window unfolds before his face. A large one, right in midair. Rounded corners, soft shadows. Welcome, player. Loading system. A progress bar creeps up from the bottom. And now, picture this scene. A guy is sitting on the pavement in the middle of a strange street under 2 suns, staring at the loading window hanging in the void. His brain is tired, very tired. So his first thought isn't panic. His first thought is professional. The animation is smooth. Someone put some effort into this. The bar creeps up to 100%. It freezes. Doyun waits. The bar resets to 0 and starts crawling again. Doyun squints. It crawls. It freezes. It resets. And then the strangest thing happens. The window flashes and spits out a line. 99 active systems detected. Another one below it. An ID conflict detected. Then another, and another, and another. The lines pour out like an error log in a production environment at 3 in the morning, when something has completely crashed. Doyun stares at it for 10 seconds without looking away. Then he says very calmly out loud, because someone has to say it, "Oh, race condition. Classic." And in that very second, something clangs against a rock behind him. He turns around. 3 meters away stands a girl his age. Tall, dark hair in a low ponytail, light leather armor with silver trim. At her feet lies a green goblin, waist-high and absolutely dead. In the girl's hand is a sword, or rather, half a sword. The other half falls. The girl stares at Doyun the way one might look at a person who has just fallen from the sky. The sword clatters against the cobblestones. Clang. Doyun raises his hand and waves awkwardly. The girl doesn't move. He clears his throat. "Excuse me, could you tell me what city this is?" The girl remains silent for a couple more seconds. Then she bends down, picks up the sword without looking, and answers in a language Doyun has never studied, and which, for some reason, he understands. "This is the outskirts of Veldheim. And where are you from?" Doyun looks at the 2 suns, at the dead goblin, at the window that still hangs in front of his face, spewing lines of error messages. "From Seoul," he says. The girl frowns. She clearly doesn't know of such a kingdom. Doyun sighs inwardly. He realizes 3 things. First, he isn't in Seoul. Second, he's most likely dead. That laptop did blow up after all. Third, whoever wrote this world system, it's crashing right now, and it's crashing because of him. The girl hadn't sheathed her sword. She held it lowered but didn't put it away. Doyun noticed this. Doyun noticed a lot of things in the first few seconds of meeting people. It was a professional habit. She was assessing him as a threat, a skinny guy in strange clothes sitting on the pavement and talking about a non-existent city. He didn't look like a threat, but in this world, there apparently was no such thing as a safe stranger. Doyun very slowly raised both hands, palms up. "I don't have a weapon," he said, "and I don't understand where I am, at all." The girl narrowed her eyes slightly. The system window in front of Doyun's face finally stopped spewing out error messages. The progress bar froze at 87%. A new message appeared above it. Emergency mode. Basic initialization complete. Full synchronization postponed. Doyun read this, and for the first time he was overcome, not by panic but by fatigue, a very familiar kind. This is what every project launched in a rush looked like. Safe mode. A placeholder. And the developer's comment, "We'll figure this out later." Doyun laughed very quietly. The girl tilted her head to one side. "Are you okay?" she asked. Doyun shook his head. "No," he said honestly. "I'm not okay. 5 minutes ago I was somewhere else, and I think I'm pretty hungry." It was true. His stomach had been growling for a long time, and it growled as if Doyun hadn't eaten in days. The girl looked at him for a couple more seconds. Then she did something Doyun hadn't expected at all. She bent down and pulled a piece of bread wrapped in a linen cloth out of her belt pouch. She held it out. "Here," she said, "and step away from the body. Goblins start to stink in 10 minutes. Doyun took the bread. The bread was stale, coarse, made from some kind of flour he'd never tasted before. It was the best bread of his life. Doyun ate in silence for about 3 minutes. The girl stood nearby without sheathing her sword. She showed no impatience. She just stood there. When Doyun finished eating, he finally noticed what he should have noticed right away. There were no labels above her head, no badges, no levels. This wasn't a game. This was a world, where people lived with their systems as if they were organs. Doyun swallowed the last bite and quietly said thank you. "My name is Han Doyun." The girl nodded. "Celine, just Celine, no last name." Doyun noted that too. Celine sheathed her sword on her back. The movement was smooth and practiced. Doyun had only seen such movements in very well choreographed fight scenes. Celine gestured to the side. "I'm going to Weldheim. It's a 2-hour walk. If you don't have any other plans, come with me. We'll figure out who you are once we get to the city." Doyun looked in the direction she indicated. There, around the bend in the street, rooftops were visible, tiled, with chimneys. Above one of the roofs, a glowing blue symbol resembling a stylized letter E hung in the air, most likely the emblem of some guild. Doyun thought for a second. He really didn't have any other plan. He didn't have any plan at all. He stood up. His legs were shaking. "Let's go," he said. The system window in front of his face didn't disappear. It simply became translucent and shifted to the corner of his field of vision, like a minimized program in the system tray. Doyun walked beside Celine and tried not to stare around too obviously. It wasn't going well. On the way, they came across a peasant leading a creature that looked like a horse but had 2 short horns and rust-colored fur. A thin, golden symbol sometimes flashed above the peasant. Doyun mentally noted it as an active skill icon. They came across a cart loaded with vegetables, some of which glowed with a faint blue light from within. They came across a woman washing clothes in a stream, but her hands hung in the air above the water without touching it, and the clothes washed themselves. Everyday magic. Very peaceful. Very ordinary. No one paid it any mind. Doyun walked on, and a picture slowly formed in his mind. This is a world with a system, with interfaces, with classes, and every person has just one system. He, on the other hand, has 99, and they're stuck on the loading screen. Somewhere halfway there, Celine asked without turning around, "What's your class?" Doyun didn't answer right away. He thought for about 5 seconds. Then he told the truth, but not the whole truth. "I haven't figured it out yet." Celine nodded. "It happens. For some people, the first boot takes several hours. It took my cousin 12. Doyun silently thanked Celine's unknown cousin. This person had just covered for him indefinitely. A little over an hour later, they reached the city gates. The gates were stone arches, with 2 guards in chainmail and helmets. Hanging above the arch was a glowing scroll with some kind of runes that slowly rotated in the air. Doyun looked closely. He didn't understand the runes, but next to them he saw something else. A small gray inscription in Korean. Above the runes, in very fine print, System login log. Version out of date. Update impossible. Doyun stopped. Celine turned around. "What?" she asked. Doyun opened his mouth, then closed it. Only he could see that inscription. He realized it immediately. None of the guards saw it. Celine didn't see it. It was a debugging hint. Veldheim smelled like everything at once. Bread, smoke, manure. Some spices Doyun had never smelled before. Metal lubricant, sour wine, wet stone. It almost overwhelmed Doyun. He had lived for 6 years in an office that smelled of air conditioning and coffee and nothing else. But here, the air was alive, thick, full of character. Celine walked ahead confidently. She obviously knew the city. Doyun tried not to fall behind. Narrow streets wound between 2- and 3-story houses with tiled roofs and exposed wooden beams. The windows were small, the panes were slightly warped. Here and there, signs hung in the air. Not painted ones, but ones that were actually suspended in the air. A glowing loaf of bread rotated slowly above the baker's shop. A spinning sword hung above the armory. A mug hung above the tavern, from which a glowing liquid poured out and immediately flowed back in. Doyun watched this and thought that whoever designed this UI had a pretty good sense of style. Celine stopped at a small 2-story house with a sign shaped like a rolled-up scroll. "Here," she said. "It's an inn. The owner knows me. You'll get a bed and dinner for 1 copper crystal." Doyun opened his mouth and realized he didn't have a single copper crystal. He didn't have anything at all. In the pockets of his jeans were only a crumpled piece of gum wrapper and his earbuds. Celine must have read it on his face. She sighed. "I'll pay for you," she said. "One day. After that, you're on your own." Doyun wanted to object, but Celine had already pushed open the door. It was dark inside, low ceiling, wooden beams, a few tables, the smell of stewed meat. Behind the counter stood a bald man in his 50s with a thick mustache. He saw Celine and broke into a smile. "Arkwright's daughter," he said. "Haven't seen you in 3 months." Celine tensed slightly. Doyun noticed. "Just Celine," she said. The innkeeper nodded without pressing the matter. Celine placed a small, transparent pebble the size of a pea on the counter. The pebble glowed faintly. 1 bed, 1 dinner, for the guest. The innkeeper looked at Doyun. Doyun tried to look presentable. It didn't go so well. The innkeeper nodded. "Go upstairs, 3rd door on the left." Celine turned to Doyun. "I'll come in the morning. If you run away at night, I won't be upset. If you stay, we'll talk." She turned and left. The door closed behind her. Doyun stood in the middle of the tavern, thinking that he had just been saved by a person he'd known for 90 minutes. The innkeeper set a bowl in front of him. In the bowl was something hot, dark, and smelling so good that Doyun's stomach growled again. "Eat," said the innkeeper, "and don't ask any questions. It's written all over your face that you're very tired today." Doyun sat down. He ate slowly. It was some kind of stewed grain with meat and dark vegetables. Incredibly delicious. As he ate, he watched. A small window hung in the air behind the counter. It was glowing. It had inscriptions that Doyun didn't understand. The owner periodically touched it with his finger and changed something. It was clearly an accounting interface. System. Doyun squinted, and once again saw what no one else could see. Over the owner's main interface ran a thin gray inscription in Korean. Class, Innkeeper, Level 5. Active skill, Atmosphere Control. Reduces visitor aggression by 12% within a 6-meter radius. Hidden debuff. Eye fatigue, 41%. Recommendation, rest for 4 hours. Doyun froze with a spoon in his mouth. He was seeing someone else's system, from the inside, with all the hidden parameters, with debug information that even the host himself couldn't see. Doyun chewed very slowly. Something began to click in his head. Not fear, not panic. Curiosity. Deep professional curiosity that, in his past life, had made him sit over a single bug for 20 hours straight. He finished eating. He waited for the owner to approach. "Thank you," said Doyun. "Very tasty." The owner nodded. And then Doyun took a chance. "Excuse me," he said cautiously. "You should get some rest. Your eyes look very tired." The owner froze. He looked at him suspiciously. "How do you know?" he asked. Doyun shrugged. "I just noticed." The owner stared for another second. Then he smiled. "You have a keen eye. Go upstairs." Doyun climbed the creaky staircase, the 3rd door on the left. Inside was a tiny room, a bed, a table, a basin of water. Doyun woke up to the sound of someone knocking on the door. The knocking was polite but persistent. Doyun opened his eyes. A low ceiling with beams, the smell of hay and wet wood. He didn't immediately remember where he was. Then he remembered. 2 sons, a goblin. Salin, 99. Doyun sat up on the bed. A rolled-up window flickered in the corner of his vision. The knocking repeated. "I'm awake," Doyun said in Korean. and immediately realized he wasn't speaking Korean. Words in the local language came out of his mouth, his voice, not his words. Doyun froze. This was something new. The door opened slightly. Seelin stood in the doorway, without armor, in a simple gray shirt and dark pants. Her hair was down. She looked younger than yesterday, and at the same time, more serious. "I promised I'd come in the morning," she said. "It's morning now." Doyun looked out the window. It was getting light beyond the crooked glass. One of the suns had already risen. The second was still hiding behind the rooftops. Doyun stood up. He smoothed out his wrinkled t-shirt. He realized he looked like a bum. Celine apparently realized it too. "Go downstairs," she said. "Have something to eat. Then we'll talk." Doyun nodded. Celine closed the door. Doyun washed his face with cold water from a basin. He dried himself with a rough cloth. He went downstairs. The tavern was empty. Celine was sitting at one of the tables. 2 plates stood before her. Porridge, bread, a mug with something hot. Doyun sat down across from her. Celine waited until he started eating. Doyun began. Celine spoke only after he had eaten half. "I was watching you yesterday," she said. "You're not from this kingdom, nor from the neighboring one. I've heard many accents. I've never heard yours before." Doyun chewed. "That's true," he said. "I'm not from this world." Celine didn't blink, she just stared. Doyun realized that in this world, such a statement apparently wasn't as shocking as he'd thought. "It happens," Celine said flatly. "Once every 10 years, once every 20. People fall from the sky. They're usually picked up by the Council of Systems, or the guilds. No one picked you up. That's strange." Doyun thought for a moment. "Maybe I fell quietly," he said. "Maybe," Celine said. "Or maybe you weren't registered. It's rare, but it happens. Then you have no status, no documents. You're a ghost." Doyun put down his spoon. "Is that bad?" he asked. Celine tilted her head slightly. "It depends," she said, "on what you do. If you quietly, no one needs you. If you do something noticeable, they'll notice you. And then it's bad. Very bad." Doyun remembered that. Celine took a sip from her mug. "That's why I'm asking straight out," she said. "What class are you in? Right now, not yesterday. Right now." Doyun looked at her. He thought for about 10 seconds. He had 2 options: lie, or tell the truth to this girl who had fed him twice and paid for him once, and who looked as if she'd been tired of lying even before she was born. Doyun chose a third option. "I don't have just one class," he said quietly. "I have many." Celine froze. "How many?" she asked. Doyun looked into her eyes. 99, he said. "All first level." Celine very slowly set the mug down on the table. Doyun saw her knuckles turn slightly white. She didn't say anything for a minute. Then she said one word. "Show me." Doyun swallowed. He didn't know if he knew how to show his window to someone else. He tried. He reached toward the window in his mind. He opened it. And in his mind, as if he'd dragged it outward, the window trembled and appeared in the air above the table, large, translucent, with 99 lines. Celine read for a long time. Doyun watched her gaze slide from top to bottom, then from top to bottom again, then once more. When she finished, she said very quietly, "It's impossible. One person, one system. That's the rule. That's the law. It's written in the heavens." Doyun nodded. "I know," he said. "I don't understand it either." Celine looked up at him. And in her eyes there was not awe, not fear, but something else. Something very much like the hope a person has been carefully hiding for many years. "A hidden line at the bottom," she said, "in an unfamiliar language. What does it say?" Doyun looked down. A gray line about administrator privileges. Celine had seen it. She didn't understand the characters, but she saw that the line was there. Doyun remembered that. It meant the line wasn't just for him. "It's just in Korean," Doyun said cautiously. "It says there that I can see other people's systems and sometimes change them." Celine was silent for a long time. Then she did something Doyun hadn't expected at all. She pulled a short knife from the sheath on her belt. She placed it on the table in front of her and said, Doyun, if you've lied to me, even about a single word, I'll find out. And then we'll come back to this knife. But for now, she took her hand off the knife. Right now I want you to look at my sword. Doyun blinked. A sword? Celine nodded. The sword lay at her feet in its scabbard wrapped in cloth. She placed it on the table next to the knife. The sword was long. Doyun placed his hand on the hilt of the sword. The leather wrapping was warm. Not from the sun, from something else. From the fact that the sword was not just a piece of metal. Doyun felt it immediately. He closed his eyes and mentally reached for the sword just as he had reached for his window. Something responded. Not immediately, with a delay, like an old server that no one had pinged in a long time. An interface unfolded before Doyun's closed eyes, not his, the sword's. Doyun gasped inwardly. Objects in this world had their own interfaces, objects with a history, objects with a binding. It was brilliant, and it was horribly poorly documented. The sword's interface looked like an old spec sheet. The sword's name was Brightvein, Generation 6, binding active, owner, Seelan Arkwright. Next came a list of specs: sharpness, weight, balance, magical resonance, and at the very bottom, a gray line that only Doyun could see. Hidden parameter: resonance with the owner's pulse. Target frequency: 72 beats per minute. Owner's current frequency: 58 beats per minute. Discrepancy: 24%. When a strike coincides with the owner's pulse cycle, the skill execution fails. Doyun opened his eyes very slowly. Seelan stared at him without blinking. "What?" she asked. Doyun licked his lips. "Your sword," he said. "It's not broken." Seelan frowned slightly. The sword was tuned. To someone with a pulse of 72 beats per minute. It wasn't you. It was probably your great-grandfather. Your pulse is 58. Every time your strike coincides with your own pulse, the sword malfunctions, because it thinks it's a stranger's pulse. Celine held her breath. Doyun continued. That's why 1 out of every 100 of your strikes misses for no reason. It's not that you're weak. The sword isn't tuned to you. Celine very slowly placed her hands on the table. Her knuckles had turned white again. Doyun saw her shoulders trembling. Just a tiny bit. The way someone trembles who has held something very heavy inside for 3 months and has allowed it to move for the first time. "Can this be fixed?" she asked. Her voice was very quiet. Doyun thought. "It can be," he said, "not quickly." "I need some things." Celine nodded. "What kind?" Doyun thought for a moment. First-level Alchemist, first-level Herbalist, first-level Tailor. He mentally opened 3 of his 99 systems at once. A dull pain immediately struck his temples, as if someone had pressed down on his head from the inside. Doyun winced. Celine noticed. "What's wrong with you?" she asked. Doyun waved his hand. "Nothing," he said. "It's just, when I use a lot of systems at once, I feel sick." Celine silently poured him some water from a pitcher. Doyun drank it. The pain eased slightly. "I need," he said, "a good linen thread." Doyun mentally looked at the tailor's interface and added, "About 1.5 meters long." Celine nodded. "A dry stalk of a plant called—" Doyun mentally glanced at the herbarium. "Moonleaf." Celine raised her eyebrows. "That's rare," she said, "but it can be obtained." "A drop of oil." Doyun looked at the alchemist. "Oil from cider berries, 1 drop." Celine nodded. "Cider grows outside the city." "I can gather some." Doyun nodded. "And one more thing," he said. "You'll need to learn something." "What?" Seelan asked. "Strike on the exhale," Doyun said. "Not on the inhale. Right now you're striking on the inhale. I saw it yesterday on the goblin. When you strike on the inhale, your pulse speeds up with each strike, and that strike coincides with the sword's rhythm. And the sword misfires." Celine looked at him. Doyun suddenly realized very clearly that this girl, whom everyone around her considered weak and unstable, had just heard from a stranger that she wasn't actually weak at all. That no one had simply prepared her for this world, and that it could be fixed. Celine didn't cry. Celine didn't smile. Celine just stared at the table for a long time. Then she said quietly, "I'll go get some herbs, and some oil. Today. Wait for me in the evening." She stood up. She placed another, larger, clear pebble on the table. "This is for you," she said. "For food. For the day. I'll be back soon." Doyun wanted to say no. Celine raised her hand. "If you fix the sword," she said it flatly, "I'll give you everything I have. If you don't fix it..." She looked at the knife that was still lying on the table and said nothing more. She turned around. She left. Doyun sat alone in the empty tavern with 2 plates and a mug and a knife and a small clear crystal on the table, and with a dull pain in his temples from 3 systems open at once. He slowly closed 2 of them. He left only Alchemist open. The pain had almost gone. He looked at the minimized window in the corner of his vision. He opened it mentally. Under the 99 lines, there was now something new. A log of recent actions. Access to an external system. Item, bright vein, successful. No changes were recorded. Access logged. Doyun read the last line twice. Access recorded. That meant someone had seen it. Celine returned in the evening. Doyun had spent the day in the tavern. He hadn't gone out, not because he was afraid, but because he had work to do. He sat at a table in the corner and mentally flipped through his 99 systems, one by one. He opened them. He looked at the interface. He read the skill descriptions. He closed them. He opened the next one. He didn't risk opening more than 2 at a time. His temples were already throbbing by 3 o'clock. By 6 o'clock, he had a table in his head. Not on paper, in his head. He didn't have any paper. Level 1 Alchemist, basic skill, mixing simple reagents, 4 available recipes. Level 1 Blacksmith, basic skill, repairing small metal objects. Object weight limit, 2 kilograms. Level 1 Herbalist, basic skill, determining a plant's edibility by touch. Level 1 Cook, basic skill, preparing simple food. Bonus, plus 2% to nutrient absorption. Level 1 Tailor, basic skill, creating a simple seam. The strength of the seam depends on the material. First level Minstrel, basic skill, reproducing a melody with the voice. Bonus, plus 1 to the listener's attention. First level Fisherman, basic skill, determining the depth of a body of water by sight. First level Animal Trainer, basic skill, understanding an animal's mood within a 3-meter radius. Level 1 Cartographer, basic skill, memorizing a route after passing through it once. And so on, and so on. Every skill was weak, each was first level. Each on its own was almost useless. A cook who could only make porridge slightly better. A tailor who could only sew a straight seam. An alchemist who could mix 4 recipes, and all 4 were from a beginner's textbook. But Doyun was no beginner. Doyun had been fixing distributed systems for 6 years. He knew one thing that no one else in this world. Weak components, with the right architecture, produce a result that a single strong one cannot. By evening, he had reached the 47th system. His head ached, his eyes ached, his back ached from the hard bench. But he already knew a great deal. And he knew something else. Every time he opened another system, a thin gray line appeared in the log at the bottom. Access to the system recorded. Someone was watching. Someone was counting. And that someone was not a human. It was the network itself. When the tavern door opened, Doyun immediately recognized Selin's footsteps. Steady, measured. The footsteps of a person accustomed to walking in armor. Celine walked over to the table. She placed 3 items in front of him. A skein of thin white linen thread, a dry stem with narrow silvery leaves, and a small vial of dark oil. Moonleaf, she said. Cider oil, thread, everything you asked for. Doyun looked at the ingredients, then at Selin. You have dust on your cheek, he said. Selin blinked. She ran her hand across her cheek. Doyun mentally opened the Herbalist and the Alchemist at the same time. The pain in his temples returned instantly. He winced but didn't stop. He reached for the dry stem. He touched it with his fingers. The Herbalist provided information. Moonleaf. Properties. When burned, it emits smoke with a vibration frequency matching the resonance of metal, used for tuning musical instruments. Doyun removed his hand from the stalk. He picked up a thread. Mentally, he switched to the Tailor instead of the Herbalist. The pain changed, not stronger, but different. The Tailor prompted him. When woven into a triple helix knot, linen thread creates a vibration damper. Doyun looked at the oil. He opened the Alchemist a little wider. Cider oil. When applied to metal, it reduces the resonant frequency by 14%. The effect lasts 12 hours with a single application, a permanent effect when absorbed into the winding. Doyun shut down all 3 systems. His head was throbbing. He clasped his temples with his hands and simply breathed for a few seconds. Celine waited, silently, patiently. "I know what to do," Doyun said when the pain subsided. "I need an hour." And silence. Celine nodded. She sat down at the neighboring table. She took out a whetstone and began sharpening a short knife, quietly, rhythmically. The sound of stone against metal was almost soothing. Doyun began to work. He unwound the thread, measured out a piece. The tailor had suggested the length. He took a moonleaf stem, broke it apart. Dry particles scattered onto the table. The herbalist had suggested grinding them into a powder and rubbing it into the thread. Doyun ground. His fingers weren't strong. His fingers were those of a programmer. But they were precise, and they were used to painstaking work. Then he dripped a drop of cider oil onto the thread. One drop. The alchemist suggested that was all he needed. The thread darkened. It became slightly stiffer. It smelled bitter. Doyun took Celine's sword. He unwound the old wrapping from the hilt. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, from a migraine. He worked slowly. He wound the new thread into a triple helix knot. The tailor guided his fingers. Each coil fell into place precisely. 40 minutes later, he was done. The hilt looked almost exactly as it had before. Slightly darker, slightly different texture. An ordinary person wouldn't notice the difference. Doyun placed the sword on the table. He opened its interface. The hidden parameter, resonance with the owner's pulse. Target frequency. Doyun looked. The number had changed. It had been 72. It was now 62. Not 58. 62 too. Not perfect, but the difference between 62 and 58 isn't 24%. It's 7. And a 7% discrepancy is 1 miss in 400 strikes, not 1 in 100. Doyun looked at Celine. "Done," he said. "Not perfect, but better. Much better." Celine set down the whetstone. She stood up. She walked over to the table. She picked up the sword. She gripped the hilt and froze. Doyun saw her face. She was feeling something, something she hadn't felt before. "The sword has stopped rattling," she said quietly. Doyun nodded. "Now strike as you exhale," he said. "Not as you inhale. That's important." Celine looked at him. Then she turned and walked out of the tavern. Doyun stood up and followed her. In the tavern's backyard stood an old stone pillar, 6 feet tall, gray, heavy. Celine stood before it. She closed her eyes, exhaled, and struck. The sword sank into the stone like butter. The pillar split in two. The top half fell to the ground with a dull thud. Celine stood with the sword in her hand and looked at the cut. The cut was even, smooth, perfect. Doyun stood in the doorway, chewing a piece of bread he'd grabbed from the table. Celine turned around. Her eyes were wet. But she wasn't crying. She just stood there with the sword in her hand and wet eyes, staring at the skinny guy in the dirty t-shirt who was chewing bread in the doorway. "Don't thank me," Doyun said. "It was a typo in your configuration." Celine quickly turned away. She sheathed her sword. She stood with her back to him for about 5 seconds. Then she said without turning around, "I'm not leaving." Doyun blinked. They spent the first week together. Celine earned the money. Doyun took notes. Celine left at dawn and returned around noon with a small bag of crystals. She took hunting jobs, small creatures around the city, rats the size of dogs, goblins that strayed into the farms, spider queens in the basements of shops. Celine handled it easily. Now that the sword didn't rattle, she was a completely different fighter. Doyun could see that even with his inexperienced eyes. She came back calm, not tired, sometimes with a slight smile that she immediately hid. She didn't talk about the fight. She put the crystals on the table and sat down across from Doyun, silently eating what he had prepared while she was gone. Doyun cooked. It was the first useful application of his level 1 cook skill. The skill was weak. Porridge was 2% easier to digest. Vegetables didn't burn if you watched the fire. The meat turned out slightly more tender. Trivialities. But Doyun noticed something strange. When he cooked for a specific person, knowing their stats, the food turned out even better. He was cooking for Celine. He knew her pulse. He knew she expended a lot of energy on her legs and back. He knew that her level 3 swordsman system consumed magical energy through her arm muscles. And his level 1 cook suggested recipes that would help Celine recover faster. Nothing magical, just the right proportions of salt, fat, and carbohydrates, tailored to one specific person. Doyun wrote everything down. Celine brought him a notebook on the very first day, a thick one, with rough pages made of some kind of gray paper. Pen and ink. Doyun was getting used to writing with a pen. It came out crooked, but legible. On the first page he wrote, Log number 1, System Documentation. Then came the entries.
System 1, Alchemist. Basic recipes. Minor healing potion. Fatigue relief potion. Insect repellent powder. Food preservation oil. He wrote out every recipe in detail. Ingredients, proportions, cooking time, side effects. Then he wrote his comments. The minor healing potion restores 10 health points. Ingredients: silverweed, water, and a pinch of salt. Cooking time: 3 minutes over a flame. Comment: cheap and weak. But what if, instead of water, I use the decoction from the Herbalist's recipe? Every evening, Doyun sat over his notebook and thought. Not as a mage, not as a warrior, as an engineer. If the alchemist provides reagent A, and the herbalist provides plant B, and the cook can mix them at temperature C, what will result? No one in this world had ever asked such questions, because no one had access to two systems at the same time. Every player was locked into their own class, and every class was like a separate service that didn't know the others existed.
Doyun knew that feeling. He had worked for 6 years with microservices that couldn't communicate with each other. And he knew that the most interesting things happen precisely at the junctions. On the 12th day, a breakthrough occurred. Doyun was making breakfast, an ordinary breakfast, porridge made from the grains Celine had bought at the market. He stirred the porridge over the fire while mentally keeping the cooker open. On the table nearby lay a vial with the remains of a minor healing potion he'd brewed yesterday for practice. The alchemist was closed. Doyun simply looked at the vial, and he thought, what if? He opened the alchemist. A pain in his temple immediately made itself known. 2 systems. The ceiling for comfortable work. Doyun picked up the vial. He dripped 3 drops of the potion into the porridge. The cook and the alchemist reacted simultaneously. A message Doyun had never seen before flashed before his eyes. Cross-recipe detected.
Cook system and alchemist system. Result: bread. Restores 15 mana points upon consumption. Side effect: mild drowsiness. Recipe not registered in the database. Assigned unique status. Doyun froze with a spoon over the pot. Mana bread. He looked at the porridge. The porridge had changed. It had become slightly thicker, slightly lighter in color, and it gave off a faint scent that wasn't the smell of porridge and wasn't the smell of a potion. It was a new scent. Doyun took a bite. The taste was strange. Not bad, not good, just new. As if food and magic had met and didn't quite understand each other, but decided to give it a try. Another message flashed in his peripheral vision. Mana restored, plus 15 units. Doyun didn't even know he had mana. He opened his status screen. At the bottom of the list of 99 systems, he found a line. For the next few days, Doyun didn't bake mana bread. He wanted to. He wanted to very much.
His engineer's brain was buzzing with the desire to test every possible combination. But Celine told him one thing that brought him back to reality. If anyone finds out you can do this, they'll take you away. And they'll kill me because I'll be in the way. Doyun looked at her. Celine wasn't joking. Celine never joked. Doyun hid the notebook with the recipe under his mattress and decided that first he needed a wall, then the recipes. Celine was the wall, but Celine alone wasn't enough. Celine was strong, but she was alone, and the world was big and greedy. They moved out of the tavern on the 14th day. Celine found a place, a small house on the outskirts of the commercial district. 2 rooms, a kitchen, a basement. The roof leaked in 3 places. The walls were gray with age. The rent was 4 silver crystals a month. Celine paid 2 months in advance. Doyun didn't ask where she got so much money. She didn't say. They settled in. Doyun repaired the roof.
A first-level blacksmith let him work with small iron parts. He straightened the nails, replaced the door hinges, lubricated the lock. Celine dragged a table in from somewhere. Big, heavy, oak. Doyun placed it in the middle of the main room. He laid out his notebook on the table. Ink, vials of reagents he'd started collecting. herbs drying on a rope by the window. It was starting to look like a workshop, just a little bit, but it looked like one. On the 18th day, the first customer arrived. Celine brought her, not on purpose. Celine had stopped by the shop for provisions and struck up a conversation with the shopkeeper. The shopkeeper complained that her inventory tracking skill had stopped working 3 days ago, and now she was counting by hand, making mistakes and losing money. Celine said she knew someone who could help, and she brought the shopkeeper to Doyun. The shopkeeper's name was Elsa, class, merchant, level 4. Short, red hair tucked under a scarf, hands red from work. She looked at Doyun suspiciously, young, skinny, no visible class, no guild emblem. "This guy can fix systems," Celine said flatly. Elsa looked at Celine, then at Doyun. "How much?" she asked. Doyun didn't know how much. He hadn't even thought about money. "1 copper crystal," he said. Elsa snorted. "That's not even funny. They charge 50 silver for system repairs." Doyun looked at Celine. Celine shook her head almost imperceptibly. But Doyun didn't want 50 silver. He wanted to practice. 1 copper, he repeated. "If I can't fix it, I'll return it." Elsa shrugged. "You're crazy. But for 1 copper, why not?" Doyun asked her to sit down. Elsa sat down. Doyun held out his hand. "Can I?" he asked. Elsa nodded warily. Doyun touched her wrist. He closed his eyes, and he saw it. The interface of the level 4 merchant system unfolded before his closed eyes. Neat, structured, with 4 active skills and 2 passive ones. The inventory management skill was the third. Doyun looked closer. The skill flickered, unstable, like a monitor indicator about to go dark. Doyun dug deeper. He read the skill's parameters as if reading an error log. Skill version, date of last update, dependencies. And he found it. The inventory management skill depended on the passive skill, numerical memory. Numerical memory was working normally. But 3 days ago, Elsa had received a new item, a ring with a +5 luck bonus. Doyun found the ring in the equipment list, and he found a conflict. The luck bonus ring used the same memory slot as the inventory management skill. They were conflicting. The ring overwrote part of the skill's data every time Elsa activated it. Doyun opened his eyes. "You have a new ring," he said. "Good luck." Elsa blinked. "Yes, I bought it last week." "Take it off," Doyun said. "It conflicts with your inventory skill. They use the same system resource. When you wear the ring, the inventory skill doesn't get enough memory and crashes." Elsa stared at him for a few seconds. Then she slowly slipped the ring off her finger. She waited. A window appeared before her face, one that Doyun couldn't see from the outside. Elsa stared at it. "It works," she said quietly. "Accounting works." Doyun nodded. "If you want to keep wearing the ring, you'll need to first level up your number memory to level 3. Then the skill will be stable enough to share resources with the ring." Elsa was silent for a long time. Then she placed not just 1 copper crystal on the table, 5 silver ones. Doyun wanted to object. Elsa raised her hand. "In 3 days of downtime, I lost 30 silver," she said. 5 isn't enough. But that's all I have on me. And one more thing." She looked him in the eyes. "I'll tell my friends." Elsa left. Celine stood by the wall with her arms crossed. 1 copper crystal," she said with an inscrutable expression. Doyun shrugged. "I didn't know the going rate," he said. Celine tilted her head slightly. "Now you do." Elle kept her word. 3 days later, a woman named Greta arrived, a 3rd-level weaver. Her hands ached after every use of her rapid weaving skill. Doyun checked her system. The skill was consuming 30% more stamina than it should have because one of the internal variables was set to maximum instead of optimal. Doyun couldn't change the variable. He only had read-only access. But he found a workaround. He told Greta that before each weaving session, she needed to warm up her hands in a specific way. 10 circular outward, then 5 inward. This caused the skill to activate through a different chain, and stamina consumption dropped to normal. Greta paid 3 silver coins and left in tears of joy. 2 days later, an old man arrived, a level 6 fisherman, 50 years of experience. His skill for detecting schools of fish had stopped working. He moved from a coastal village to the city. Doyun found the cause in a minute. The skill was tied to the environment. The water type was fresh. A river with a high concentration of magical minerals flowed near the city, and the system classified it as magical rather than fresh.
The skill simply didn't recognize the water. Doyun told the old man to go fishing at the lake 12 kilometers to the west. The water there was clear and fresh. The old man paid 2 silver coins and brought back fish the next day. A big one. Fresh. Doyun prepared it with herbs. A first-level cook suggested that this fish went best with dried basil and a pinch of rock salt. Celine ate in silence, her eyes closed. By the end of the 3rd week, Doyun had 12 clients. Word spread slowly. Not along the main streets, through the back alleys, through the laundries and market stalls. The people who came to Doyun were not heroes, not raiders, not fighters. Merchants, weavers, fishermen, bakers, tailors. People from the lower classes with small problems that felt enormous to them. And Doyun fixed them, every one. For little money, sometimes for food, sometimes for ingredients. Celine watched. She didn't interfere, she was just there. Standing by the door when a client arrived, seeing them off when they left, sharpening her sword in the evenings. She cooked when Doyun was too exhausted from his migraines, and gradually Doyun began to notice that Celine was changing. She started walking around the house without her boots. She started leaving her sword by the door instead of by the bed. She laughed once, quietly, briefly, but she laughed. Doyun said something silly about how his level 1 minstrel system had rated the neighbor's roosters crowing as a hostile sound effect that reduced concentration by 3. Celine snorted, then she laughed, and immediately fell silent, as if she herself had been startled by the sound. Doyun didn't comment, he just kept talking, and Celine listened. On the 23rd day, she arrived. Short, thin, with dark circles under her eyes and hands that trembled with a slight quiver. Dark, short hair. Her clothes were shabby but clean. She stood in the doorway and looked at Doyun the way a person looks who has come to the last place on earth. "You fix systems?" she asked. Doyun nodded. "I try," he said. She stepped inside. "I'm Yuna," she said. "Show Yuna. I'm 19, and my system is broken. Not like the people who come to you. It's truly broken." She sat down on a chair. Her hands were still trembling. 2 years ago, she said, I was a 5th-level elementalist, the best in my class. I was set to join the Silver Chronicle Guild. I was an idiot. I tried to master a forbidden combination, a double cast of a pillar of fire and an ice storm at the same time. My class couldn't handle it. The system threw a critical error and crashed. Now I'm operating at 12% capacity. 12 out of 100. Every healer, every master, every alchemist says the same thing. Irreparable. Forever. Learn to live with it. Yuna fell silent, her hands clenched into fists. Doyun looked at her silently, then he reached out his hand. "Can I?" he asked. Yuna flinched, then she nodded. Doyun touched her wrist. He closed his eyes and saw. The 5th-level elementalist system was beautiful. Even broken, it was beautiful. Like a sports car that had crashed into a wall. The body was crumpled, the engine was still in place. But the connection between the engine and the wheels was severed. Doyun looked, intently, for a long time. He navigated her system as he would navigate someone else's code, line by line, parameter by parameter, and he saw. The system wasn't broken forever. It was broken the way a program breaks after a failed update. The files were corrupted, but not deleted. The configuration was off, but a backup existed. Deep within Yuna's system lay a copy of its original state before the crash. The system had automatically created a backup before Yuna activated the forbidden combination, like an autosave before a dangerous operation. The problem was that the system couldn't roll back to the backup on its own. There were 147 conflicts between the current state and the backup. Each conflict had to be resolved manually, one by one. Doyun opened his eyes. Yuna was looking at him. There was such hope and such fear in her eyes at the same time that Doyun forgot for a second what he had wanted to say. "Everyone lied to you," he said. Yuna blinked. "Your system isn't destroyed. It rolled back with errors. There's a backup inside, a complete copy of you from before the crash. But to restore it, I need to sort through 147 conflicts, one by one. It won't be quick. It'll take days, maybe weeks." Yuna looked at him. Her lips were trembling. She tried to say something but couldn't. Doyun waited. Yuna swallowed. "You're not joking," she said hoarsely. Doyun shook his head. "I never joke about code," he said. Yuna covered her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook. Ceylin quietly left the room and closed the door behind her. Doyun sat across from the crying 19-year-old girl and waited. He didn't comfort her, didn't touch her, didn't say a word. He just waited. When Yuna looked up, her eyes were red and wet, but her hands were no longer shaking. "When do we start?" she asked. "Tomorrow," said Doyun. "Come in the morning, and eat before you come. It'll take a while." Yuna stood up. She walked to the door. She stopped. She turned around. "How much does it cost?" she asked. Doyun thought for a moment. "Do you know how to start a fire?" he asked. Yuna blinked. "At 12% I can light a candle," she said. "I need someone to light the fire in the stove in the mornings," said Doyun. "Ceylin hates doing it." Yuna arrived the next day at dawn. Doyun was still asleep. Celine opened the door. Yuna stood in the doorway with a stony expression and clenched fists, as if before a fight. Celine nodded silently and let her in. 10 minutes later, Doyun came down from his room. His hair was a mess, his eyes were cloudy. The t-shirt he'd been wearing for 24 days straight was wrinkled and had a stain of herbal oil on the sleeve. Yuna looked at him, and something resembling disappointment flashed across her face. This man was going to fix her system. Him. Doyun sat down at the table. "Eat," said Celine, placing a bowl of porridge in front of him. "Plain. No mana." Doyun ate slowly. Yuna sat across from him and waited. She tried to look calm. She couldn't manage it. Her foot was bouncing under the table. Her fingers were twisting the hem of her shirt. Doyun finished eating. He pushed the bowl away. He looked at Yuna. "This is going to be unpleasant," he said. "It won't hurt, but it'll be unpleasant.
When I look into your system, you'll feel like someone's rummaging through your things." Yuna winced. "I know," she said. "They've looked at me before. Many times." Doyun nodded. "But I'll look deeper than they did," he said. "Much deeper." Yuna pressed her lips together. "Go ahead," she said. Doyun held out his hand. Yuna placed her palm on top of his. Her hand was hot. Unnaturally hot. An elementalist. Even broken, she burned from within. Doyun closed his eyes. Yuna's system opened up before him like a corrupted file system. He'd seen this yesterday too. But yesterday, he'd only skimmed the surface. Today, he went deeper. First conflict. The fire arrow skill. Current version 2.1. Backup version 3.0. Conflict. Version incompatibility. Doyun studied it closely. When Yuna tried to cast twice, the system emergency rolled back some skills to older versions. Fire arrow was on version 3. It rolled back to version 2. But the other skills remained on their current versions.
And now Fire Arrow was conflicting with them because it was a generation older. Doyun knew how to fix this, in theory. He needed to force the skill to update to the current version, but he couldn't write code into someone else's system. He could only read it. Doyun thought, for a long time. Yuna sat motionless, only her hand trembled. Then Doyun found a way. He couldn't update the skill directly, but he could tell Yuna how to do it herself. "Activate Fire Arrow," Doyun said without opening his eyes. Yuna flinched. "Here?" she asked. "In the house. The weakest one," Doyun said. "Just activate it." Yuna raised her free hand. A small flame appeared at her fingertips. Tiny, pitiful, barely alive. 12% of its power looked exactly like that. Doyun saw the skill activate within the system. And he saw something else. At the moment of activation, the skill tried to upgrade itself. For a split second, tried to update itself. Automatically. But it couldn't because a conflict was blocking the update. Doyun mentally traced the chain of the block. The Fire Arrow skill conflicts with the Temperature Control skill. Temperature Control conflicts with the Heat Resistance passive skill, a chain of 3 links. If you remove the middle link, the skill will update. "Deactivate Temperature Control," Doyun said. Yuna turned her head. "What?" "Your passive skill, Temperature Control. Deactivate it." "I can't," Yuna said. "It's passive. It's always on." Doyun opened one eye. "It's passive, but it has an activation threshold. -10 degrees. If the temperature around you drops below -10, the skill will switch to sleep mode. That's standard behavior. It'll turn off for 3 seconds. Yuna looked at him. "In those 3 seconds, activate Fire Arrow," said Doyun. "The skill will open to refresh. Without conflicting with temperature control, it will refresh. and the first conflict will disappear. Yuna was silent for a few seconds.
You want me to freeze the room to -10, she said. And within the 3-second activation window, she fired fire arrow. Yes, said Doyun. Yuna looked at Celine. Celine was standing by the wall with her arms crossed. Her face was inscrutable. Yuna looked back at Doyun. I have 12% power, she said. I won't have enough mana to cool the room down to -10. Doyun nodded. I know, he said. So we won't cool the room. We'll go to the glacier north of the northern gate. Celine said it gets down to -15 there even in summer. Celine raised an eyebrow. Said, she confirmed. Doyun stood up. Let's go, he said. 3 conflicts today, the rest tomorrow. Yuna stood up. She looked at Doyun the way someone looks who can't decide whether to believe him or not. Then she said quietly, If this doesn't work, she didn't finish. It will work, Doyun said. Yuna clenched her fists. Let's go, she said. They left the house, the 3 of them. Celine in front with her sword, Yuna in the middle, Doyun in the back with a notebook under his arm. It took 40 minutes to reach the glacier. The glacier was a cave in the hillside beyond the northern gate. It was cold inside, very cold. Doyun immediately felt the skin on his hands tighten. Steam rose from his mouth. He looked at the debug data. Temperature, -13. That's enough. Stay here, Doyun told Yuna. Wait. When I say so, activate the fire arrow. Yuna nodded. Her jaw was chattering from the cold. Doyun touched her hand. He closed his eyes. He looked at the system. Temperature control was flickering, as critical threshold was approaching. -13. The skill began to shift, slowly. 1 second. 2. The skill went into sleep mode. Now, said Doyun. Yuna raised her hand. The fire arrow shot from her fingers. Small, dull. It struck the cave wall and scattered into sparks. But Doyun didn't see the arrow. He saw the system. The fire arrow skill, upon activation and without conflict with temperature control, began updating. Version 2.1. Progress. 10. 30. 60. 100. Updated to version 3.0. Conflict 1 of 147 resolved. Doyun opened his eyes. Yuna stood before him, shivering from the cold. What? She asked. It worked, Doyun said. 1 of 147. Yuna exhaled. The steam from her breath was hot, hotter than it should be. I can feel it, she said. I can feel that something has changed. Doyun nodded. Your power isn't 12% right now, he said, looking at the data. 13.4. Yuna laughed. It was a strange laugh. Wet, broken. Like someone who'd been told for 2 years that they'd never walk again and who'd just wiggled a toe. 13%, she said. Doyun nodded. By the end of the week, it'll be 30, he said. Yuna looked at him. And for the first time all day, there was no anger, no fear, no distrust on her face. Only surprise. Pure, childlike. You're crazy, she said. The second time in 2 days. Doyun shrugged. Let's go back, he said. I'm cold, and Celine's lips are blue. Celine, who was standing at the cave entrance, really was blue, but she was smiling, just a tiny bit. They walked back. Yuna walked beside Doyun, not in front, not behind. Yuna came every day. Every morning she stood in the doorway with a stony face and clenched fists. Every morning Doyun came down with tousled hair and bleary eyes. And every day they worked through conflicts. 2 at a time, 3, sometimes 1 if the conflict was complex. The methods varied. Some conflicts required cold, others heat. For others, complete darkness. For still others, water. Doyun studied each conflict as a separate bug. He read the dependencies. He built chains. He found that one link that could be removed so the skill would refresh. Sometimes the link was easy to remove. Run 100 meters and then activate the skill immediately. Sometimes it was difficult.
He had to brew a special potion from the Herbalist and the Alchemist simultaneously, and Yuna had to drink it a second before activation so that one of the passive skills would switch to reboot mode. By the end of the first week, Yuna's power was 29%. Doyun had guessed wrong. He'd promised 30. Yuna said that 29 was already more than she could have dreamed of. Then she added that he still owed her 1%. Doyun laughed. Yuna didn't laugh, but the corner of her mouth twitched. Celine watched. She didn't interfere with the work. She was doing something else. She was keeping watch. She walked through the market and listened. She talked to merchants and guards. And on the 6th day, she came home with news that made Doyun put down his notebook. "People are talking about you," Celine said. Doyun looked up. "Who?" "At the market," Celine said. "Among the artisans. They say there's a strange guy living on the outskirts of the trading district who isn't in a guild and repairs systems for pennies. It's just small talk for now. But if Yuna recovers to 50%, everyone will find out." Doyun looked at Yuna. Yuna was sitting in the corner, practicing fire arrow on a candle. The candle would light up and went out, lit up and went out. Yuna didn't turn around but was clearly listening. "What do you suggest?" Doyun asked. Celine sat down at the table. "2 options," she said. "First, quit, close the shop, leave town, live quietly." Doyun was silent. "The second," said Celine, "become so useful that it'll be more dangerous to mess with you than to leave you alone." Doyun thought for a moment. Then he said, "I need a workshop, a real one, with a sign, with a door that locks, with a basement for experiments." Celine nodded. "Money," she said. "We have 23 silver. To rent a decent space in the commercial district, you'll need at least 15 silver a month." Doyun looked at the table. On the table stood a pot of plain porridge. Next to it lay a vial with the remains of a potion. "Mana bread," he said quietly. Celine froze. "We'll cook up a batch," Doyun said. "A small one, 10 servings. You'll sell them, not at the market, privately. To the people you trust. To the hunters who go into the rifts. To those who need mana like air. We'll set the price lower than mana potions, but not by much." Celine looked at him for a long time. "It's dangerous," she said. Doyun nodded. "I know, but we need a wall, and a wall costs money." Yuna turned away from the candle. "I'll help sell them," she said. Celine looked at her. Yuna shrugged. "I know people," she said. "Former classmates, low-ranking hunters. The ones who go into small rifts and can't afford mana potions. They'll buy it, and they'll keep quiet. If I ask them to." Doyun looked at Yuna, at Celine, and realized he already had a team. A small one. A strange one. A swordswoman who sharpens her knife every night. A 29% elementalist who lights candles. And him, a programmer in a dirty t-shirt. But it was a team. Doyun baked mana bread for 2 days, 10 portions. He prepared each one separately. A cook and an alchemist at the same time. A migraine after every portion. Rest. Again. Rest. By the end of the 2nd day, he had 10 small loaves wrapped in clean cloth. Each restored 15 mana points. Celine took 5. Yuna took 5. They left in the morning. They returned in the evening. Celine placed a small pouch on the table. Inside the pouch were 2 gold crystals and 7 silver ones. Yuna placed a second pouch next to it. 1 gold and 12 silver. Doyun looked at the crystals. 3 gold and 19 silver for 10 loaves of bread. That was more than he had earned in all the previous days combined. "A single hunter," Yuna said. "He bought 3 portions at once. He goes to the rift every 2 days. He says mana potions cost him a quarter of his earnings. Mana bread is a third cheaper." He asked if he could order more. Doyun nodded. "Another one," said Celine. "The captain of a 5-man raiding party. He bought 2 portions. Tried one right there." Yuna found the workshop. On the 3rd day of searching, she arrived out of breath and with eyes ablaze. "There's a place," she said, "on the corner of the commercial district, a former bakery. The owner died 6 months ago, no heirs. The building belongs to the city. The rent is 10 silver coins a month, because the roof is leaky and the oven is cracked." They went to take a look. The building was small, 1 story with a basement, 2 windows facing the street, a heavy oak door. Inside, it smelled of old flour and dampness. The main room was spacious, a former sales room, a counter, shelves on the walls, a stove in the corner, a large one, made of stone, with a crack running across the entire side. Behind the main room was the kitchen, small, with a sink and a second, smaller stove. The basement was dry and dark, with shelves along the walls, perfect for storing ingredients and reagents. Doyun stood in the middle of the main room and looked around. Seelan stood by the door with her arms crossed. Yuna shifted from foot to foot. "The furnace," said Doyun. "I can fix it. First-level blacksmith and alchemist. Mix a mortar with a strengthening potion added and patch up the feck. The roof, too." Celine raised an eyebrow. "You know how to repair roofs?" she asked. "No," said Doyun. "But I have a blacksmith, a carpenter, and a mason. All first level. Together we can handle it." They rented the building that same day. 10 silver coins for the first month. Doyun paid with the proceeds from the feck. They worked for the next 5 days. Doyun repaired, Seelan hauled, Yuna burned. Literally. At 32% power, Yuna could heat metal to the right temperature. Doyun took advantage of this. He heated nails and hammered them into the beams. He mixed mortar for the oven using the alchemist and the mason at the same time. The result was a mortar that dried in an hour and became harder than stone. The oven came to life. The roof stopped leaking. The shelves were cleaned and reinforced. Seelan found 3 chairs and a small round table somewhere. Yuna dragged a curtain from her friend's shop. Doyun hung it on the window. On the 6th day, the workshop was ready. Doyun stood in the middle of the room, thinking of a name. Yuna sat on the counter, dangling her feet. Seelan stood by the door as usual. "What should we call it?" Doyun asked. Yuna shrugged. "Bag's Workshop," she suggested. "No one will understand," said Doyun. 99th, said Seelan quietly. Doyun turned around. Seelan wasn't looking at him. She was looking out the window. "You have 99 systems," she said. "It's your number." Doyun thought about it. Then he nodded. "The 99th workshop. It sounds good." The next day, Soyeon made the sign. But Soyeon didn't show up right away. Soyeon showed up on the 2nd day after the opening. Small, quiet, with slumped shoulders and eyes fixed on the floor. A 2nd-level seamstress. She didn't come as a customer. She came because she'd heard the new workshop was taking orders for clothing repairs. She wanted to offer her services. A side job, for copper crystals. Doyun looked at her hands. Her hands were small, with calluses from the needle, with slender, strong fingers. These were the hands of a master. Doyun asked her to show what she could do. Soyeon took a piece of fabric and a needle out of her bag, and in 3 minutes, she embroidered a pattern on the fabric that took Doyun's breath away. The pattern was simple. A flower with 5 petals. But every stitch was perfect. Every line was even. Every color transition was smooth. It was beautiful. Truly beautiful. Doyun opened her system. Level 2 seamstress. Basic skills. Stitching, embroidery, mending, alterations. All the basics. All at the minimum. And one hidden parameter that glowed so brightly that Doyun blinked. A talent for materials. Innate. Level undetermined. This parameter meant that Soyeon felt the fabric, not like a seamstress, like a part of herself. She knew which stitch was needed not because she had been taught, but because her fingers knew. Doyun closed the system. He looked at Soyeon. Soyeon stood there, waiting for an answer. Small, quiet, ready to hear no. She'd heard no her whole life. Seamstress. It was a disgraceful class, the lowest. In a world where swordsmen cleaved through rocks and mages summoned storms, a seamstress was a nobody. Trash, a system error. Doyun sat down. "Soyeon," he said, "you're not looking for a side job, you're looking for a place." Soyeon looked up, for the first time. And there was so much pain in those eyes that Doyun regretted looking for a second. "I need a partner," Doyun said. "Not an employee, a partner. I have a level 1 alchemist. You have a 2nd-level tailor. If we combine your threads with my potions, we'll get clothing with magic woven into it. Fabric armor. Bandages that heal. Gloves that strengthen your grip. No one in this world has ever done anything like this. Because no one had access to both systems." Soyeon looked at him. Her lips were trembling. "My class," she said very quietly. "Your class is brilliant," said Doyun. "It's just that no one ever told you about it." Soyeon cried quietly, silently. Tears streamed down her cheeks and she didn't wipe them away. Yuna turned toward the window. Celine went outside. Doyun waited. When Soyeon stopped crying, she wiped her face with her sleeve. The first month of the workshop passed in a blur. Doyun worked 14 hours a day, sometimes 16. Sometimes he forgot what day and night were, and Seelan had to literally drag him away from the table and tell him that both suns had already set and that normal people were sleeping. Doyun nodded. He lay down. He closed his eyes, and 20 minutes later he was sitting at the table again because an idea was spinning in his head that he couldn't let go. In the morning, he saw clients. By this point, there were consistently 3 or 4 people a day. Minor issues. A skill wasn't working. A passive was conflicting with a new item. A skill was lagging after a class update. For Doyun, these were standard tickets. He would sit across from the person, ask for their hand, close his eyes. He read the system. He found a bug. He explained how to work around it. The client paid, left, next. The main event began in the afternoon. Experiments. Doyun and Soyeon sat across from each other at a large oak table. Ingredients lay between them. Vials, fabrics, threads, herbs, powders, oils. Doyun's notebook was open to a page marked Cross Recipes version 2. By this point, Doyun had studied all 99 systems, every single one, down to the very last basic skill. He had 47 pages of documentation written in small, crooked handwriting. And he knew one thing that kept him awake at night. The systems of this world were isolated from one another. Each operated within its own container. Each used its own resources. Each had its own recipes, skills, and progression. But there were no walls between them. There were conditional boundaries, like between modules in a monolithic application. The boundaries were soft, conditional. And if you took the output of one system and fed into the input of another, the result was something found in no reference book in this world. Because no one had ever done this before. Because every person had only one system. The first thing they created was simple. So simple that Doyun later wondered why no one had thought of it sooner. A bandage, an ordinary bandage, made of linen, but soaked in a minor healing potion. The minor healing potion was the simplest recipe a first-level alchemist could make. Silverweed, water, a pinch of salt, 3 minutes over the fire. 10 healing points per use. Instant effect. 30 seconds and that's it. Weak, cheap, basic level. Doyun brewed the potion. He poured it into a flat bowl. Soyeon took a strip of linen cloth. She dipped it in and began to sew. The stitch was special. Soyeon explained that it was called a closed loop stitch. It creates microscopic pockets inside the fabric that hold the liquid, like a sponge but made of threads. Doyun didn't fully understand the mechanics, but he understood the result immediately. When Soyeon finished, the bandage looked ordinary, slightly damp, slightly heavier than usual. Doyun picked up a knife from the table. Celine flinched. Doyun ran the blade across his index finger. Not deep, just a scratch. Blood oozed out in tiny drops.
Celine stepped forward. Doyun raised his hand. "Wait," he said. He wrapped the bandage around his finger, and he felt it. The potion was starting to work. Not instantly, slowly. Warmth spread across his skin. The scratch was closing up. Not in 30 seconds, in a minute. 2, 3. The warmth didn't stop. Doyun waited 10 minutes. He removed the bandage. The scratch was gone. The skin was clear, pinkish, like after a fresh burn that had already healed. Doyun looked at the system message flashing before his eyes. Cross-object detected. Alchemist system and Tailor system. Result: a small healing bandage with prolonged effect. Healing: 10 units. Distribution: 1 unit every 6 minutes. Total duration: 60 minutes. Item not registered in the database. Assigned status: unique. Doyun slowly placed the bandage on the table. He looked at Soyeon. Soyeon looked at the bandage, then at Doyun, then back at the bandage. "It works," she said quietly. Doyun nodded. "An hour instead of 30 seconds, he said. "Weaker per unit of time, but 10 times longer. For minor wounds, for cuts, for burns, for anything that doesn't require immediate treatment. It's perfect." Soyeon pressed her hands to her chest. Her fingers were trembling, but not from fear, from something else. Because for the first time in her life, she had created something that mattered, something that was unique, something that would have been impossible without her class, without her stitch, without her hands. Doyun saw it, and he remained silent, because some things don't need to be said out loud. They simply have to be. The second thing was more complicated, and it was born out of chance. Doyun was preparing an ointment for a client. The client had sore joints, the alchemist's standard recipe: cider oil, Moonleaf powder. Warm water. Mix. Apply. Done. The ointment relieved the inflammation for a few hours. Doyun mixed the ointment while thinking about something else.
He was thinking about Yuna, about how her hands trembled after every recovery session. Tremors, a side effect of the system's recalibration. Her nerves were overloaded. Her fingers shook. Sometimes for half an hour, sometimes for an hour. Yuna was angry. She hid her hands behind her back. She said everything was fine. Her hands were shaking. Doyun thought about the tremors and mixed the ointment, then suddenly stopped. He looked at his hands, at the ointment, at the moonleaf powder. Moonleaf. Properties. Vibration reduction. He had already used this property when repairing Selin's sword. Moonleaf, upon contact with metal, lowered the resonant frequency. But what if upon contact with skin? Doyun opened the Herbalist. The pain in his temple immediately made itself known. Moonleaf for external use. No data. No data. Because the level 1 Herbalist knew only the basic properties. Doyun closed the Herbalist. He opened the Alchemist. Cider oil when applied to the skin. Reduces muscle tension by 4%. Duration, 40 minutes. Doyun looked at the two ingredients. Moonleaf reduces vibration. Cider oil reduces tension. Separately, they're useless. Together, Doyun mixed them. Not an ointment, a soak, liquid, for fabric. He called Soyeon. Soyeon brought a pair of gloves she had been sewing for an order. Simple, made of thin leather, lined with linen. Doyun soaked the lining with the mixture. He waited for it to dry, put on the gloves, felt nothing, took them off. Waited an hour, put them on again. This time he sat in them for 10 minutes. And after 10 minutes he noticed. His hands had calmed down. Not more relaxed, calmer. As if the background noise he hadn't even noticed had been removed. Doyun looked at the system message. Cross-object detected. Alchemist system and Tailor system. Result? Stabilization gloves. When worn, reduces hand tremor by 8%. Effect duration is constant while worn. The item is not registered in the database. Assigned unique status. 8%. Sounds like a small amount. For an ordinary person, it's nothing. For an archer shooting at 200 meters, it's 2 centimeters of accuracy. For an alchemist mixing potions drop by drop, it's the difference between success and failure. For Yuna, with her tremor after recovery, that's 30 minutes without shaking, instead of an hour with it. Doyun handed the gloves to Yuna. Yuna put them on. She looked at her hands. Her hands weren't shaking. Yuna clenched her fists. She unclenched them, clenched them again. She looked up at Doyun. Something flashed in her eyes. Something hot. Something she immediately hid behind her usual mask of irritation. Normal gloves, she said. Don't show off. Doyun smirked. He knew that in Yuna's vocabulary, normal gloves was the highest praise. The third thing surprised even him. Soyeon came to see him that evening. The workshop had already closed. Yuna had gone to practice. Celine was on patrol in the neighborhood. Soyeon stood in front of Doyun, crumpling a ball of yarn in her hands. I have an idea, she said very quietly. Doyun looked up from his notebook. I want to knit a scarf, Soyeon said, but not an ordinary one. I want to add an infusion to the yarn, like in the gloves, but a different one. Doyun set down his quill. What kind? He asked. Soyeon paused. Then she said, an anti-fatigue potion. Doyun knew this recipe, a basic one, first-level alchemist. Sleepy mint root, warm water, a drop of honey. Effective when taken orally. Reduces physical fatigue by 20% within 10 minutes. Weak, short-lived, basic level. But Soyeon wasn't suggesting drinking the potion. She was suggesting weaving it into the yarn. Doyun thought for a minute. Then he said, let's try it. They worked for 3 hours. Doyun brewed the potion, carefully. Drop by drop, he added it to the water in which Soyeon was soaking the woolen thread. Soyeon pulled out the thread. Dried it. She tested it for strength. The infusion made the thread slightly stiffer, slightly darker, but not brittle. Soyeon began to knit. Doyun watched. Her fingers moved so fast that he couldn't keep up. Stitch by stitch, row after row. The scarf grew. Long, soft, dark gray with a slight greenish tint from the potion. When Soyeon finished, she handed the scarf to Doyun, silently. Doyun took it, wrapped it around his neck. The scarf was warm, soft, pleasant against the skin. Doyun sat and waited. 10 minutes passed,
and nothing happened. 20 minutes, and still nothing. Doyun was about to say it hadn't worked, but 30 minutes later, he suddenly realized his head didn't hurt. His head had been aching all day, since morning, after 3 clients in a row and 2 conflicting prescriptions.
A dull, throbbing pain in his temples that had become his constant companion. And now it was gone, completely. After 40 minutes, he felt his back relax, his shoulders dropped. The muscles that had been in constant tension 20 hours a day suddenly let go. An hour later, Doyun felt as if he'd slept a full 8 hours. Refreshed, rested, pain-free, light. No noise in his head. He slowly took off the scarf. He looked at it, then at Soyeon. Soyeon was waiting, her hands folded in front of her, her eyes downcast, waiting for the verdict. As always, as she was used to. Doyun looked at the system message. Cross-object detected. Alchemist system and Tailor system. Result: recovery scarf. When worn, removes accumulated physical fatigue. Fatigue rate: 1 unit per minute. Maximum effect equivalent to 8 hours of rest after 60 minutes of continuous wear. Item not registered in the database. Assigned unique status. Doyun read the message twice. Then he looked at Soyeon.
"Do you understand what this is?" he asked.
Soyeon shook her head. "It's an item that no guild in the world has," Doyun said. Soyeon looked up. "Not a single one," Doyun repeated. "Because no alchemist has ever worked with a tailor. They have different systems, different guilds, different worlds. They don't even talk to each other. And you just knitted a scarf that replaces a night's sleep." Soyeon clenched her fingers so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her lips trembled. But she didn't cry. She looked at the scarf, at her hands, at the scarf. "I made this," she said. "You made this," Doyun confirmed. "Your system, your hands, your skill. I just boiled the liquid. You knitted it. And it works exactly like this because you know how to guide the thread so the impregnation doesn't lose its properties. That's your talent, Soyeon, not mine." Soyeon stood before him, motionless. Doyun saw her chin trembling, how she was holding on with all her might. He turned away, gave her time.
A minute later, Soyeon said quietly, "Thank you," and she left the room. Doyun heard her climb the stairs. He heard her close the door to her room, and he heard her finally cry behind that closed door, quietly, like someone who had believed for 20 years that his class was trash, and for the first time heard that his class was a miracle. The rumors grew. With each passing day, with each client, with each item sold, the bandages sold out in 3 days. 2 archers from the local Hunters Guild ordered gloves. Doyun didn't sell the scarf. He wore the scarf himself. Because without the scarf, he slept 4 hours a day and worked like a zombie. With the scarf, he slept 4 hours a day and worked like a normal person. Customers came every day. No longer just artisans. No longer just merchants and weavers. A young third-rank hunter came. Tall, lean, with 2 short swords on his belt. A third-level pathfinder. A problem. The evasion skill has a delay.
In combat with fast creatures, that's dangerous. He'd already been to 3 masters. They all said the skill was working fine. Doyun asked for his hand, closed his eyes, 10 minutes. He read the hunter's system like a code, line by line. Evasion skill, current version, standard dependencies, tied to the reaction speed parameter. Doyun found it. Reaction speed, base value 87, current value. Doyun frowned. The current value was changing. It was 87 in the morning, 73 in the afternoon, 61 in the evening. The evasion skill was tied to the current reaction speed value, not the base value, the current one. And the current value dropped throughout the day. Why? Doyun dug deeper. He found the passive skill, Digestion, level 3. It activated automatically after eating. It consumed system resources, the same resources that reaction speed used. 2 skills were sharing the same pool. And when digestion was active, reaction speed dropped. Doyun opened his eyes. "You eat before a fight," he said. The hunter blinked. "Well, yeah, I have a hearty breakfast. Then lunch in the field. Sometimes a snack before a raid. So what?" "Your evasion skill is tied to reaction speed," Doyun said. "And reaction speed shares resources with digestion. When you eat, digestion takes up some of the resources. Reaction speed drops. The evasion skill slows down." The hunter looked at him. Then he blinked. So just means I shouldn't eat before a fight, he said. Don't eat for 2 hours, Doyun said. Or eat only light food, fruit, crackers, nothing heavy. Then digestion won't kick in fully, and your reaction speed will stay at the baseline level. The hunter looked at him for another 5 seconds. Then he pulled out a small bag. He poured 5 silver crystals onto the table and left. He turned around at the door. For 4 months I thought I was getting old, he said, that my reflexes were failing, that it was time for me to retire, but it was food.
Food. He shook his head and walked out.
Doyun looked at the 5 silver crystals on the table. Yuna approached. She looked at the crystals. You're taking too little, she said. I'm taking enough, said Doyun. Yuna snorted, but she didn't argue. A week later she came. Madeline Baker, a 7th level healer, from the Order of the Temple of the One Healing. She didn't come alone. She brought a boy, about 12 years old, skinny, with his right arm hanging motionless at his side. His shoulder was dislocated, but not in the usual way. Madeline explained. She had treated the boy 3 times. The healing worked. The shoulder popped back into place, and 2 days later it would dislocate again, on its own. For no reason. No blow, no fall. Just that in the morning the boy would wake up and his arm would be hanging limply again. Madeline didn't understand why. The Order didn't understand. They sent her to Doyun because rumors had reached the Order about a man who repairs systems.
The Order did not approve.
But the boy was 12, and his arm wasn't working. Doyun looked at the boy. The boy was staring at the floor. He was scared, and in pain. Doyun dropped to one knee to be at eye level with him. "What's your name?" he asked. "Tim," the boy said quietly. "Tim. Can I look at your hand? I won't touch it. I'll just look." Tim nodded. Doyun reached out. He gently touched the boy's good hand. He closed his eyes. Tim's system was young, clean. First-level apprentice class, the standard starting class for children under 14. After 14, the system chooses a specialization. Tim had 2 active skills and 4 passive ones. One of the passives was second-level bone fortification. A good skill for a growing body. Doyun took a closer look, and found it. The bone fortification skill was working as intended. It fortified the bones, made them stronger, denser, more reliable. But Tim was a 12-year-old boy. His bones were growing, actively, quickly. A growth spurt, and the bone strengthening skill conflicted with that growth. The skill tried to lock the bone in place. Growth tried to lengthen it. The shoulder joint was caught between 2 forces. The bone grew, the skill held. The joint couldn't take it. Dislocation. Madeline treated the dislocation. The skill fixed it again. The bone grew again. Another dislocation. A vicious cycle. Doyun opened his eyes. He looked at Madeline. "My bones are growing," he said. Madeline frowned. "Of course," she said. "He's 12. He has the bone strengthening skill." Doyun said, "Second level. It strengthens his bones. And his bones are growing. The skill is preventing them from growing. The shoulder pops out because the joint can't keep up with the growth. You treat the dislocation. The skill sets the bone back in place. The bone tries to grow again. Another dislocation." Madeline looked at him. Doyun saw something change in her eyes. Slowly. Like someone who had looked at a problem from one angle their whole life and suddenly saw it from the other. "We need to deactivate the bone strengthening skill," Doyun said. "Temporarily. For a month. Maybe 2. Until the growth spurt ends. The shoulder will pop back into place on its own. And it won't pop out again." Madeline was silent. "But deactivating a passive skill," she said. "That." "I know," said Doyun. "It's not done. Skills are considered a gift from the system. Turning off a gift is like throwing away a present. But it's not a present, it's a tool. And a tool that hinders a child's growth must be removed while the child is growing." Madeline looked at the boy. The boy looked at Doyun. There was hope in the boy's eyes. Small, cautious, but hope. Madeline nodded. "I'll try," she said. She placed her hands on the boy's shoulder. She closed her eyes. Doyun saw her level 7 healer system at work. A green glow. Soft. Warm. Madeline entered the boy's system. She found the bone strengthening skill and gently, very gently, put it into sleep mode. The boy flinched. Then he relaxed. A minute later, he cautiously raised his right hand. It rose. Slowly. Painfully. But it rose. Tim looked at his hand, then at Doyun, then at Madeline, then at his hand again, and he smiled. Widely. Childishly. The way children smile when the world suddenly stops being scary. Madeline healed the boy completely in 3 days. His shoulder was back in place. The bone-strengthening skill remained in sleep mode. His arm worked. Tim left the workshop waving both arms and hopping with every step. Madeline watched him go. Then she turned around. She entered the workshop. Alone. Without the boy. For no reason. She stood in the doorway and looked at Doyun. She was tall. A head and a half taller than Celine. Soft facial features. Round cheeks. Chestnut hair tucked under the order's white headscarf. Her hands were folded in front of her, palms together, as if she were praying all the time. Or maybe she was just used to holding her hands that way because if she didn't, they would start shaking from exhaustion. A smile, that very one. Tired, gentle, familiar. The smile of someone who smiles because people expect her to smile. "How are you?" Doyun asked. He asked it without thinking, automatically. Just as he asked everyone who entered the workshop. But Madeline froze. It was a question she hadn't expected. Not here. Not from him. Not now. People usually asked for something else. Heal me. Help me. Save me. Lay your hands on me. Take away the pain. Make it so it doesn't hurt. No one had ever asked how she was. Never. Not once in 7 years of service in the order. "I'm fine," she said, reflexively, just as she always answered. Doyun looked at her. He didn't touch her. He didn't close his eyes. He just looked and saw. Even without full access to the system, he could see the surface layer. Thin gray lines above her head. Healer class, 7th level. Active skills, 4. Passive skills, 3. And next to the skills, indicators flickered that no one but him could see. Fatigue, 91%. Magic exhaustion, 78%. Physical exhaustion, 64%. Hidden debuff, chronic overexertion, stage 2 of 4. Recommendation, immediate rest for at least 48 hours. Warning, if the current regimen continues, the probability of system failure within 30 days is 34%. Doyun read these lines and something tightened inside him. Not anger, not pity, something else. Something very quiet and very firm. "No," he said, "you're not okay." Madeline blinked. Her smile faltered. "Sit down," Doyun said. Madeline didn't move. Doyun turned toward the stove. He didn't wait for her to sit down. He just started working. He opened the first-level cook, then the herbalist. 2 systems at once. His temples throbbed as usual. He took a dried root of sleepy mint from the shelf. From another jar, a pinch of sleep-inducing pollen. Honey. A small clay cup. Water from a jug. He set it on the stove. He waited for it to heat up, not to a boil, to the temperature the cook had suggested as optimal for extracting the properties of sleepy mint. 62 degrees, no more, no less. He dropped in the root, waited 3 minutes, added the pollen, a drop of honey, stirred, took it off the heat, poured it into a cup. This tea was no ordinary brew. Doyun wasn't just steeping herbs, he was making tea for a specific person, for Madeline, for her 91% fatigue, for her 64% physical exhaustion, for her height and weight, which he estimated by eye, for her age, for her 7 years of non-stop healing without rest. The cook suggested the proportions. The herbalist suggested the dosage. Doyun listened to both of them, and he added what he had learned over 6 years in another world. When a person is tired, they don't need magic. They need a cup of tea that someone made for them. Personally. With care. With the understanding that they are tired. He placed the cup in front of Madeline. She stood in the same spot. Didn't sit down. Didn't move. "Sit down," Doyun repeated gently. 10 minutes. You can't stay on your feet." Madeline looked at the cup. Steam rose in a thin stream. The scent was soft, warm, slightly sweet, like a childhood memory of something good. Madeline looked at Doyun, then back at the cup. Then she sat down, slowly, as if she'd forgotten how, as if she hadn't sat down just like that in a long time. Just to sit, not to treat someone while sitting, not to rest between patients, but just to sit and drink tea. She took the cup in both hands. Doyun noticed that her hands were trembling, slightly. almost imperceptibly, but they were trembling. 7 years of non-stop healing. 7 years of other people's pain passing through her palms. 7 years without anyone asking, "How are you?" Madeline took a sip, and something inside her broke. Not something bad broke, something good. That wall she'd been building for 7 years. That smile she wore like a uniform. That habit of saying, "I'm fine," when everything inside was screaming that she wasn't. Tears began to fall quietly. Without a sound, without sobs, they simply streamed down her cheeks and dripped into the cup. Madeline drank and cried. At the same time, she couldn't stop either one. Doyun turned away. Not because he felt awkward, but because some people need no one to be watching. So they can cry without witnesses, without having to explain later. He turned back to the table, began sorting through the ingredients, organizing them, by jars, by shelves. Meaningless manual work that took up space and gave Madeline time. Yuna peeked in from the kitchen, heard the silence, saw Madeline at the table, saw the tears, looked at Doyun. Doyun shook his head, barely noticeably. Yuna disappeared, without a sound, without a word. Celine stood by the door, as always, back to the wall, arms crossed. She saw everything and remained silent. 10 minutes later, Madeline finished her tea. She set the cup down. She wiped her face with a handkerchief, cleanly, neatly, like someone who was used to leaving no traces. She stood up. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was hoarse, but steady. Doyun nodded. "Come tomorrow," he said. "I'll make you some more." Madeline looked at him. There was something new in her eyes, something that hadn't been there before. Not gratitude, not surprise. Something deeper, something like recognition. As if she'd been searching for something her whole life and had suddenly found it. And that something turned out to be neither magic, nor power, nor a high-level class. It turned out to be a cup of tea that someone had made for her because they noticed she wasn't feeling well. She nodded and left.
Yuna came out of the kitchen when the door closed. "Who was that?" she asked. "A healer," said Doyun. Yuna snorted. "A healer who needs healing herself," she said. Doyun looked at her, seriously, without a smile. "Exactly," he said. Yuna fell silent. Something in his tone made her fall silent. She looked at the empty cup on the table, then at Doyun, and said nothing. Madeline returned the next day. Doyun wasn't surprised. He had brewed the tea. By the time she arrived, the cup was on the table. Madeline walked in. She saw the cup. She stopped. Then she sat down and drank, without tears, this time without tears. She just sat there, drinking tea and staying silent for 10 minutes. Then she stood up. She thanked him and left. The next day she came again, and again, and again, every day, at the same time, after lunch, between shifts at the temple. She came, sat down, drank tea. Sometimes she was silent, sometimes she talked. About patience, about the boy with the shoulder who ran over every day to show how his arm was moving, about the order, about the head nurse who thought Madeline was too soft for healing and that she needed to be stricter and colder, about how she'd been healing people for 7 years and had never once gotten sick herself because she wouldn't let herself. Doyun listened. He didn't interrupt, he didn't offer advice, he just listened, and he made tea. On the 4th day, Madeline didn't come empty-handed. She stood in the doorway with a large woven basket. The basket contained herbs, lots of them, different kinds, fresh. The bundles were tied with linen thread. Labels on each bundle bore names written in neat handwriting. Doyun looked at the basket, then at Madeline. He recognized some of the herbs. Slumbering mint root, fresh, not dried. Silverweed leaves, not the usual kind, with a silver border, top grade. Iris arrived in the 5th month. Doyun knew she would come. Not because he had the ability to foresee the future. He had no combat skills at all. Only 99 first-level crafting systems and chronic migraines. No, he knew because he had been counting the days. The workshop had become too conspicuous. Mana bread was selling steadily. 20 portions a week. Doyun baked more but didn't sell it. He limited his supply, deliberately. If too much mana bread appeared on the market, someone would start asking questions. Someone already had.
3 hunter guilds ordered the healing bandages. 4 archers from the elite squad wore the stabilization gloves. Doyun didn't sell the recovery scarf to anyone, but people saw it around his neck, and they asked, and he refused, and they asked again, and the rumors grew. Every unique item that came out of the workshop was irreproducible, because each one required Doyun, his cross-referenced recipes, his combination of systems, his understanding of how an alchemist works alongside a tailor. Competitors could steal the ingredients, they could figure out the proportions, but without simultaneous access to both systems, they ended up with junk. An ordinary bandage soaked in potion would simply dry out within an hour. Without Soyeon's stitching, the potion wouldn't stay in the fabric. Without Alchemist Doyun, the infusion wouldn't activate. A vicious cycle, unique, priceless, and very, very dangerous for the owner. Doyun waited, counting days. The first month of the workshop was quiet. The second month brought talk in the market. The third month brought orders from the guilds. The fourth month saw an attempted kidnapping, which Celine and Yuna thwarted in 4 minutes. 3 masked men, low-ranking mercenaries, not even funny. Celine broke one of their arms. Yuna set the second one's cloak on fire. The third ran away. They weren't from the Silver Chronicle. Too crude, too clumsy. The Silver Chronicle operated with more finesse. The 5th month, and she arrived. Tall, slender,
with short, dark hair and attentive gray eyes that took everything in. The doorway, the arrangement of the furniture, the windows, people, exits. She did it in half a second. Doyun noticed because he was used to noticing such things himself. Not in combat, in code. When you enter someone else's code base, the first thing you do is assess the architecture, entry points, dependencies, exits. She was doing the same thing, only with the room. She walked into the workshop and smiled. It was a nice smile, warm, inviting, just enough to inspire trust, not a bit more. A professional smile. "Hello," she said. "My name is Iris. I was told you repair systems." Her voice was steady, calm, with a slight hint of uncertainty that made her seem more human. Doyun took note. "Good work." He smiled back. "Yes," he said. "Come in. Have a seat. Tea's on the way." She sat down at the table, crossed her legs, placed her hands on the table, palms open. Body language, trust, and relaxation. Textbook.
Paragraph 3. Establishing contact with the subject. Doyun poured tea. He set it in front of her, and while she thanked him, he looked, not at her system, and he saw it. 3rd level tracker class. It was on top, on the surface, like wallpaper on a desktop. Doyun looked deeper, beneath the wallpaper, and found a thin gray line. Active class camouflage. Full concealment mode. True class hidden. Level 6 shadow. Specialization. Reconnaissance and infiltration. Affiliation. Silver Chronicle Guild. Current mission. Infiltration into the vicinity of target Han Doyun. Objective. Gather information on cross-recipes and the operating mechanisms of multiple systems. Highest priority. Doyun finished reading. He took a sip of tea and gave nothing away. Not a single muscle. Not a single glance. Because Doyun was neither a warrior nor a spy. He was a programmer. And a programmer who had worked with legacy code for 6 years knows one thing better than anyone else. Patience. He knows how to look at a problem and leave it alone. Wait, observe, gather data, and act only when he fully understands the system. Doyun decided to wait. She told her cover story, a 3rd-level tracker. Her navigation skill has been acting up since a head injury. 6 months ago, she was ambushed in a fault line. She hit the back of her head. Since then, the skill has been hit or miss. She's seen 3 masters. They all just shrug. The cover story was good, well-crafted, with details, with emotion, with a slight tremor in her voice when she spoke of the ambush. Doyun nodded. He asked questions, the right questions, the ones a systems repair master would ask. But inside, he was calculating. How many details matched? How many didn't? A head injury, possibly. But a level 3 Pathfinder's orientation skill is tied to the vestibular system. With a head injury, the balance skill would be the first to suffer, not orientation. A minor detail, imperceptible to an ordinary master. Obvious to someone who reads systems like code. Doyun didn't point out the discrepancy. "I'll take a look," he said, "but it might take a few sessions. Come back in a day." Iris nodded, gratefully, sincerely, almost sincerely. She was very good. She started coming back every other day, as agreed. Doyun pretended to be working on her problem. He asked for her hand. He closed his eyes. He put on a serious face. He said there was progress, but it was slow, that the skill was damaged deeper than it seemed, that it would take time. Iris pretended she was getting better. She said the skill had become a little more stable, that her sense of direction had almost returned, that she was grateful. Between visits, she did what she had come for. She observed. Doyun saw how her eyes took in every detail. What ingredients were on the shelves, which jars were open, which were closed, what was on the table, what was in the basement when the basement door happened to be left open, how Doyun moved, how he worked, how he cooked, how Soyeon sewed, how they interacted. She memorized everything. Doyun knew this, and he let her, because he was watching her. She was a professional. She didn't ask direct questions, didn't snoop in his notebook, didn't try to steal samples. She just stayed close by, drank tea, sometimes helped clear the table, sometimes stayed for the lunch Doyun cooked for everyone. And she soaked it all in. The information, the atmosphere, the people. A week passed, 2, a month. Iris became part of the scenery. She would come in, say hello, sit down, drink tea, leave. Sometimes she stayed for an hour, sometimes for 2. Yuna was the first to get used to her. Yuna got used to people quickly in general, not because she trusted them, but because she didn't care who was around, as long as they didn't get in the way. Iris didn't get in the way, and Yuna started grumbling at her. That was a good sign. Yuna only grumbled at those she considered part of her space. She simply didn't talk to strangers. "Hey newbie," Yuna would say, "move your cup, you're taking up my corner of the table." Iris would move her cup, no comment. "No hard feelings," Yuna said with a slight smirk. She snorted and continued practicing her fire arrow on the candle. Seelin wasn't used to it. Seelin looked at Iris the way a cat looks at another cat that has entered its territory. Warily, silently, not hostile, but not friendly either. Celine sensed something. She couldn't see systems like Doyun, but she was a warrior, and warriors feel danger in their skin. And there was something about Iris that made Celine's skin crawl. Celine said nothing, but she kept her sword in its scabbard on her back even when Iris was nearby. Usually in the workshop she took it off. Madeline offered Iris some tea, that very one, the herbal kind. Madeline offered it to everyone. It was in her nature, to give, to heal, to feed, to care. She made no distinctions. To Madeline, every person in the workshop was a patient who needed something warm. Iris accepted the tea. She thanked her, and something in her eyes changed for a split second. Doyun saw it, a small crack in her professional facade. Madeline didn't try to hide it. Madeline was simply being herself, and that was scarier than any interrogation. Doyun once mended Iris's torn sleeve, silently, without being asked. She simply saw that the seam on the sleeve had come apart. She walked over. She took out a needle, and in 30 seconds, she sewed it up so that you couldn't see where the tear had been. Iris looked at the sleeve, then at Soyeon. "Thank you," she said, and her voice trembled. Just a little, by a quarter of a tone. Doyun heard it. He heard everything. He saw everything, and he waited. 2 months, 60 days. Over those 60 days, Doyun learned enough about Iris, not from her system, from her behavior. She came to the workshop not just to gather information. She came because she liked it here. She stayed longer than the assignment required. She laughed when Yuna grumbled, a genuine laugh, not a professional one. She accepted Madeline's tea with both hands, like someone who was cold. She watched Soyeon sew, and there was something like envy in her eyes. Not malicious, quiet. The envy of someone who had never known how to make something beautiful. And most importantly, Doyun checked, every week, quietly, unnoticed. He looked at his system logs. Every access to his systems, every read, every copy, was recorded. Over 2 months, Iris sent 4 reports to the Silver Chronicle Guild. Doyun saw the traces in the logs. 4 data packets had gone out through her system. He couldn't read the contents, but he could estimate the volume. Small, very small. And he could compare that volume to what Iris had actually seen over the past 2 months. She had seen a lot. She had seen Doyun baking manna bread. She saw the ingredients. She saw the proportions. She saw Soyan sewing bandages. She saw gloves. She saw a scarf. If she had passed all of that on to the Silver Chronicle, they would already be at the door. She passed on junk. General descriptions. He uses alchemy and tailoring. He makes unusual items. The mechanism is unclear. More time is needed. She sabotaged her own mission, deliberately, professionally, passing on just enough so the guild wouldn't recall her, but not enough for the guild to get anything useful. Doyun saw this and waited. At the end of the second month, he decided enough was enough. It was evening, late. The two suns had set an hour ago. The workshop was closed. Yuna had gone out of town to train. Her power was already 53%, and every evening she went to the wasteland to burn pillars of flame until she collapsed from exhaustion. Madeline had returned to the temple for the night shift. Soyan was sewing upstairs in her room. Doyun could hear the quiet, rhythmic tapping of the needle against the thimble. Celine stood by the door, as always, like a shadow, like part of the wall. Iris sat at the table drinking tea, her third cup of the evening. She had stayed longer than usual. Not for the assignment, she just stayed late. Doyun sat down across from her. He put his hands on the table. He looked at her. "Iris," he said, calmly, evenly, without threat, without reproach, just a name. Iris looked up. "What?" "I know who sent you," Doyun said. "I've known since day one." Silence. 1 second. 2. The cup in Iris's hand paused, halfway to her mouth, for a split second. Then she continued. She took a sip, set the cup down, neatly, in the exact same spot. Not a millimeter off. Control. Absolute. She looked at Doyun. "What are you talking about?" she asked. Her voice was even, a hint of surprise, a hint of confusion. "The textbook, paragraph 7, reaction to disclosure." Denial, stage 1. Doyun didn't play along. A 6th-level shadow, he said. The Silver Chronicle Guild, Foreign Intelligence Division, mission, infiltration and gathering information on cross-formulas and the operating mechanisms of multiple systems. Highest priority. Silence. A different kind. Thick. Heavy. At the door, Celine placed her hand on the hilt of her sword. Doyun saw this out of the corner of his eye. Iris didn't move. She sat and looked at him, and in her eyes, something was changing, slowly, very slowly. Her professional mask didn't fall. It dissolved. Like frost on glass when a warm palm is pressed against it. Slowly. From the edges, toward the center. "How did you know?" she asked, in a different voice. Her real one, without the facade, without the script, the voice of a woman who was tired of pretending. "I see systems," Doyun said. "All of them. The real ones. Camouflage is transparent to me."
"I saw your true class the very first second you walked through that door." Iris slowly set her cup down on the table. Her hands were trembling. Just a little, almost imperceptibly, but they were trembling. Doyun saw it. "If you knew from day one," she said, "why didn't you kick me out?" Doyun thought for 3 seconds. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because he wanted to say it right. "Because you like it here," he said. Iris turned away, abruptly, toward the window, so he wouldn't see her face. It was getting dark outside. A reddish second sun hung over the rooftops, its last glimmer. In a minute it would set, and the world would plunge into blue twilight. Doyun waited. He knew how to wait. "You can stay," he said, "or leave. It's your choice. But you don't have to lie anymore. You're tired, aren't you?" Iris stood facing the window. Her shoulders were tense. Her back was straight. Her hands were at her sides. Her fists were clenched. She was silent for a long time. A minute, maybe 2. Then she turned around. "I need to inform the guild," she said. Doyun nodded. "Inform them," he said, "but then come back." Dinner at 7. Iris looked at him, for a long time, studiously. But not like before. Before, she had studied him as an object. Now she looked at him as a person. Perhaps for the first time. She turned toward the door. Celine was standing in the doorway, hand on the hilt, her gaze steady, cold, not a shred of warmth. Iris looked at Celine, then at Doyun, then back at Celine. "I'll be back," Iris said. Celine didn't move. 3 seconds. 5. Then she slowly stepped back half a step, just enough for Iris to pass.
Not a centimeter more. Iris walked past her, sideways. Their shoulders almost touched. Iris left. The door closed. Celine stared at the closed door. "She'll be back," said Doyun. "How do you know?" asked Celine. Doyun leaned back in his chair. "Because in 2 months, she hasn't passed on a single real recipe to the guild," he said.
I checked. She was submitting garbage, general descriptions, nothing concrete. 4 reports in 2 months, every one of them empty. She's been sabotaging her own assignment since week 1. Celine was silent for a long time. Then she said quietly, "You're a terrible person, Doyun." Doyun shook his head. "No," he said. "I'm just reading the logs." Celine snorted, but there was no mockery in that snort. Something else, something like an admission. 3 hours had passed. The workshop was dark. Doyun lit 2 candles. He sat at the table. He wrote in a notebook. Recipe number 3412. A combination of the Herbalist and the Fisherman. Bait made from dried mint. Attracts fish within a 15-meter radius. Useless in battle. Useful for dinner. The door opened. Iris entered. Silently, without a smile, without a mask, without a textbook. She looked different. Not worse, not better. Different. Like a person who had taken off a suit and put on house clothes. Only the suit wasn't made of fabric, but of lies. She sat down at the table, silently. A plate stood before her. Doyun had left it. Braised meat with vegetables and grains. Cold, but tasty. He'd cooked it 3 hours ago, for her, because he knew she'd return. Iris looked at the plate, then at Doyun. Then she picked up a spoon, and silently began to eat. She ate slowly, carefully, like someone who hadn't eaten a home-cooked meal in a long time, or like someone eating for the first time in a place where they didn't have to pretend. When the plate was empty, Iris pushed it away. She looked at Doyun. "I reported that the mission failed," she said, "and that I'm staying." Doyun nodded. They came 3 weeks after Iris left the guild. 21 days. Doyun counted. "Nothing for the first 3 days," Iris explained. "The guild is assessing the situation, gathering data, deciding what to do with the lost agent." The next 4 days were also quiet, but different, quieter. Iris sensed it. Something was changing in the city. Fewer people from the Silver Chronicle on the streets. Their patrols were gone. Their information brokers had vanished from the market, as if the guild had withdrawn its tentacles from Veldheim. "That's not a good sign," Iris said. "When they leave, it means they're making way for someone bigger." On the 10th day, Doyun received the first warning. Not from Iris, from the system. A gray line flashed in the corner of his vision. Abnormal activity detected in the system network. External source. Type. Request for status of object Han Doyun. Initiator undetermined. Someone had requested information about him, through the network itself, not through people, through the system. Doyun showed the message to Ha'il, but Ha'il hadn't arrived yet. That was on the 10th day. Ha'il would show up on the 21st. Doyun jotted down the message in his notebook and went back to work. On the 14th day, Iris returned from a night patrol looking pale. "On the way from the southern provinces," she said. "A large group, not an army, pilgrims, white robes, golden symbols. The cult of the unified system." Doyun looked up from his notebook. "How many?" he asked. Iris hesitated. 300 so far, but more are joining them along the way, more every day. Doyun nodded, jotted it down, went back to work. On the 17th day, Iris said, 1,000. On the 19th, 3,000. On the 20th day, she returned from her morning reconnaissance. Early, too early. Neither sun had risen yet. She was pale, composed. Her hands didn't tremble. Iris's hands never trembled, but her voice was different. "An army," she said. Doyun set down his quill. 10,000, Iris said, maybe more. Banners of the cult of the unified system, organized, armed, with support mages, with field healers, with siege equipment. This isn't a pilgrimage, it's a military campaign. They're coming from the south. They'll be at the walls of Veldheim in 2 days. Doyun sat at the table. A notebook lay before him. Open to the page with recipe number 4281. Joint ointment. A combination of Alchemist and level 1 masseur.
Reduces inflammation 30% more effectively than the standard version. A very useful thing. A very peaceful one. Doyun slowly closed the notebook. Who's leading? He asked. Augustus Vale, said Iris. The Grand Master himself. The room grew quiet. Celine straightened up by the door. Her hand rested on the hilt of her sword. Not nervously, out of habit, like breathing. Yuna, who was having breakfast at the next table, stopped chewing. Soyeon froze with a needle in her hand. Madeline, who had arrived early and was sitting with a cup of tea, slowly set the cup down on the table. Doyun knew the name Augustus Vale. He had heard it many times, from clients, from hunters, from merchants at the market, even from Madeline, who had once mentioned him in passing.
Grand Master of the cult of the unified system, the most influential religious figure on the continent, a man who had spent 30 years building an organization on a single, simple tenet. One person, one system. This is not a rule. It is a divine law. It is the foundation of the universe. Violation leads to chaos, to destruction, to the demise of the network, to the end of the world. Vale was no fool. Vale was no fanatic in that empty sense people throw around when they want to devalue someone else's faith. Vale was an intelligent, educated, sincerely devout man who looked at the world and saw a system, literally, and that system spoke with one voice, one class per person. That is how it was intended. That is how it works. That's how it should be. And then a skinny guy appears out of nowhere with 99 classes, who fixes other people's systems with his hands, who creates objects that don't exist, who breaks every rule that Vale had defended for 30 years.
Doyun couldn't blame him for that. Doyun was a programmer. He knew what it was like when someone came along and broke the architecture you'd spent years building. It hurts. It's scary. And sometimes it's necessary. But the person who built it doesn't always see that. The problem lay elsewhere. Vale was partly right. The world really was broken. The network really had degraded. The anomalous faults really were a symptom of something terrible. But Vale saw the cause in Doyun. But the cause was in the network, in the 1,000-year-old legacy code that no one maintained, in the unhandled exceptions, in the memory leaks, in the version conflicts. Doyun knew this. Vale did not. The next 2 days were the hardest of Han Doyun's life. Harder than the 38-hour sales marathon when his server crashed and he didn't sleep or eat, running on energy drinks and sheer stubbornness. Harder than his first day in Ethereum when he woke up on the cobblestones under 2 suns with no money and no understanding of where he was or what was happening. He worked non-stop. Everyone in the workshop worked non-stop. Yuna was training, not outside the city, on the vacant lot behind the workshop. She couldn't go far, not now. Her power was at 78% by this point. 123 of the 147 conflicts had been resolved. 24 remained. At 78%, Yuna was a different person, not that trembling 19-year-old girl who had come to the tent 6 months ago. She could create pillars of fire 6 meters high. She could hurl ice spears that pierced a stone wall at a distance of 30 meters. She could erect a wall of flame 10 meters wide. She was a machine broken in half, repaired, but already terrifying. And she trained as if her life depended on it, because it did. Celine was sharpening a sword. A new one. Not the Bright Vein. The Bright Vein hung on the wall in the workshop. Celine had bought a second sword from the armorer at the market. Heavier, rougher, without a legacy, without hidden stats, just a good steel sword. She was saving the Bright Vein for a special occasion. But Celine wasn't just doing that. She had visited every person Doyun had ever helped. Every customer. Every hunter who bought mana bread. Every artisan whose system Doyun had repaired. Every fisherman and merchant and weaver and archer. She spoke to them, quietly, directly, to the point. An army is coming, 10,000. They're coming for Doyun, for the man who fixed your system, the man who baked you mana bread, the man who told you you weren't broken. I don't need your sword, I need you to stand. Stand and not hide. Not everyone agreed, some were afraid. Doyun didn't blame them. 10,000 fanatics is no joke. But many agreed. More than Celine expected, more than Doyun hoped. Madeline returned from the temple, early, without her white headscarf. Doyun saw her in the doorway and understood. She had left the order. Are you sure? He asked. Madeline smiled, that same smile, but different, not tired, calm. I need some tea, she said, and someone I can help not out of duty but by choice. Doyun made tea, Madeline drank it, and began to work. She prepared bandages, ointments, compresses. Everything Doyun had taught her to do over these past months. She was a 7th-level healer, and now she was a free healer. And that was more terrifying to her enemies than 10 ordinary mages. Soyeon sewed, for 2 days straight without a break. Her fingers flew over the fabric. She was doing something she had never done before. Cloaks with sewn-in protection. The lining was soaked in a mixture that Doyun had brewed from 3 ingredients: cider oil, moonleaf powder, and a new component, an extract of stone moss that Doyun had discovered 3 weeks ago. When processed by the alchemist, the stone moss yielded a substance that, upon contact with the fabric, increased its strength by 14%. 14%. The difference between a cut and a scratch. The difference between a wound and a bruise. Soyeon sewed cloaks for everyone. For Celine, for Yuna, for Madeline, for Iris, for herself, for Doyun. Bandages that enhance regeneration. Bandages soaked in potion. Gloves for Yuna, special ones, soaked in a solution of 4 ingredients: cider oil, moonleaf powder, stone moss extract, and a drop of mana restoration potion. These gloves reduced spell recoil by 20%. Yuna put them on. She looked at her hands. She hurled a fire arrow at the rock behind the workshop. The rock glowed red-hot. Yuna waited for the recoil. The recoil came, but it was weaker, much weaker. She looked at Soyeon, then at Doyun. She clenched her fists in the gloves and said nothing, but her eyes were burning. Doyun brewed a separate formula for each item. For each formula, he opened 2 or 3 systems at once. By the end of the first day of preparation, blood was flowing from his right nostril. By the end of the second day, from both. His head was splitting so badly that he saw the world through a haze. Black spots swam before his eyes. His hands trembled. Madeline came over every hour. She placed her hands on his temples. A green glow. Warmth. The pain receded for 20 minutes. Then it returned. Doyun didn't stop. He knew his limit. He was far beyond it. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Iris would vanish and reappear. 3 or 4 times a day. She was tracking the cult's army. Counting. 10,000. Confirmed. Battle mages. 200. Healers. 50. Field commanders. 20. Siege golems. 4. The Magister's elite guard. 40 men. Levels 5 through 9. She determined routes, speed, time of arrival. She found weak points. The southern flank was stretched thin. Supplies came via a single road. Morale was high but not fanatical. The rank and file believed in the cause. The officers believed in the Magister. If the Magister wavered, the officers would waver. If the officers wavered, the rank and file would stop. She reported to Doyun, clearly, concisely, professionally. She was the best at what she did. And she was doing it now not for the guild, for family. She surprised herself when she first thought of that word. Family. She couldn't remember the last time she'd used it without it being a cover. By evening on the second day, another one arrived. No one was expecting her. No one knew she was coming. She emerged from the twilight, quietly, like a shadow. No, quieter than a shadow. Iris was a level 6 shadow, and she hadn't heard this girl approach the workshop door. Quiet, strange, short, thin, with long dark hair that covered half her face. Eyes, large, dark. Eyes that looked as if they saw not what others see, as if they saw through walls, through time, through layers of reality that others didn't even notice. She stood in the doorway of the workshop. Doyun looked up from the table. He saw her, and something inside him twitched. Not fear, not recognition, something else. As if 2 wires had finally touched and a spark had jumped between them. "You are Han Doyun," she said. Her voice was quiet, steady, no question, a statement. Doyun nodded. She entered, slowly. She looked around the workshop. Shelves with ingredients, a table with a notebook, an oven, people. Celine, Yoon, Madeline, Soyeon, Iris. She looked at each one, then back at Doyun. "My name is Shin Ha-il," she said. "I am a 4th-level archivist. I have access to the ancient libraries of the Council of Systems. And I have come because I have something that belongs to you." She took a rolled-up sheet from her bosom. Parchment. Old. Worn. With scorched edges. It was many years old. Maybe decades. Maybe centuries. She unfolded it. Slowly. Carefully. As one unfolds, something sacred. And Doyun saw a photograph, black and white, small, glued into the parchment with some kind of solution that had preserved it for centuries. In the photograph was a man, young, around 30, wearing glasses, at a keyboard, a large beige computer, a mainframe. In the background, a rack of punch cards, linoleum floor, fluorescent light, the 1970s. Doyun knew this photograph. No, he knew this face. He had seen it. In old photographs in an album his mother hid in the bottom drawer of the dresser, which she would take out sometimes, when she thought no one was watching. His grandfather, Han Doyun Sr., a programmer, a mainframe specialist. He died in 1978, before his grandson was born. The family never spoke of him, ever. Doyun asked once, as a child. His mother pressed her lips together and said that Grandpa had gone far away, and nothing more. At the bottom of the photograph was a caption, in Korean, in neat handwriting, old, with the characteristic slant of the characters of a man who learned to write in the 1950s. Han Doyun, thank you for everything. Doyun stared at the photograph. The world around him ceased to exist. The 10,000 fanatics outside the walls ceased to exist. The migraines ceased to exist. The workshop ceased to exist. There was only him and this photograph, and his grandfather's face. Young, alive, wearing glasses, at the keyboard, in a world that couldn't possibly exist here. Doyun's hands were trembling. Not from a migraine, not from fatigue, from something deeper, from something he couldn't name. Ha-il was waiting, patiently. She knew, she understood. She had gone through this herself, through that moment when the world turns upside down and you see something that changes everything. Then she began to speak, quietly, steadily, like someone reciting words they'd rehearsed many times. The system network isn't magic, she said. It's technology. It's 1,000 years old. Maybe more. The exact date is unknown. It was brought by the first traveler, a man from your world, from a world with mainframes and coffee shops and subways and neon signs. He arrived in Ethereum 1,000 years ago. He brought knowledge with him, not magic, code, architecture, principles of system design. He created the network, or began to create it. He didn't have time to finish. He died before he could, or returned, or vanished. The data is contradictory. But the network remained. It grew. It evolved. It became what it is now. The foundation of the world. Classes, skills, levels, everything. But it wasn't finished. It had holes, bugs, workarounds, temporary solutions that became permanent. A familiar story. Doyun knew it by heart. Every programmer did. A temporary fix that lasts 10 years. Legacy code that no one touches because they're afraid it'll all break. Documentation that doesn't exist. Tests that don't exist. And one day it breaks, on its own. Because entropy waits for no one. Anomalous faults. Doyun said. Ha-il nodded. Unhandled exceptions, she said. In the network's code. Every fault is an error the system couldn't handle. It throws it out, into the physical world. Like a hole. And through that hole, things that shouldn't exist crawl out. Every year there are more faults. Every year there are more errors. The system is degrading. Soon it will collapse. And the world along with it. Doyun listened. He listened, and a picture formed in his mind. One he'd seen all along but couldn't put into words. Debug messages in Korean. System logs visible only to him. Administrator privileges. 99 systems. A race condition during boot. None of this was an anomaly. These were features, functions, built into the system 1,000 years ago. For the one who would come and fix it. The network called you, Ha-il said. It wasn't a coincidence. It had been searching. For a long time. 1,000 years. Searching for code that would recognize. A language that would understand. An architecture that would match. She found you. Found your grandfather's code. Or the code that grew out of his work. You are his descendant. You are the heir to Ethereum's first programmer. You are not a bug. You are a patch. Doyun closed his eyes, opened them, looked at Ha-il. How do you know that? He asked. I am an archivist, said Ha-il. 4th level. I have access to the ancient libraries of the Systems Council, to those sections that haven't been opened in centuries. I found records, fragments, pieces of documentation, in a language no one here knows. In your language, she paused. And I remember things. I remember things, she said more quietly. Things that shouldn't be here. Coffee shops with logos,
trains underground, neon signs, the smell of gasoline, the sound of a phone ringing. I remember it like dreams. But they aren't dreams. They're memories. Someone else's, or mine. I don't know. I thought I was going crazy. For 2 years I thought I was going crazy. Until I found out about you. She looked him in the eyes. For the first time, directly, without a wall, without a shield. You are my answer, she said. Proof that I'm not crazy. That the world my memories come from is real. And I am your key. Because I have access to the archives, to the network's documentation, to what you need to fix it. Doyun wanted to reply. He wanted to say so much. About his grandfather, about the code, about the network, about what he feels. But he didn't have time. A horn sounded outside the window, low, heavy, deep. It wasn't the sound of a hunting horn or a market bell. That's the sound of a battle horn from the army that has arrived. The cult's army had reached the walls of Veldheim. Doyun straightened up, slowly. He looked around. 6 girls were staring at him. Celine stood by the door, calm, hand on her sword, eyes steady. She was ready. She had been ready from day one.
Yuna stood by the window, fists clenched. Fire flickered on her knuckles. Her eyes burned. Angry, greedy. She had been waiting for this. Madeline sat at the table, hands folded, a smile. Not weary, warm. She was calm. For the first time in months, she was truly calm. Because for the first time, she was helping not by order, by choice. Soyeon stood by the wall, quiet, small. She held a cloak in her hands, the last one, the one she had just finished sewing, for Doyun. Iris stood by the second window, eyes narrowed, counting, assessing, working, even now. Ha'il stood at the table, with parchment in her hands, strange, quiet, with eyes that saw what no one else saw. Doyun stood up. "I'm going to the square," he said. Celine opened her mouth. Doyun raised his hand. "Alone," he said. "I'm going alone." Celine clenched her jaw. Doyun saw the muscles in her cheekbones twitch. She wanted to object. Every muscle in her body wanted to object. But she looked into his eyes and saw something there.
Something that made her fall silent. "I know what I'm doing," Doyun said, quietly, steadily, confidently. He looked at his hands, thin, with a callus from the mouse, with potion stains on his fingers, with ink smudges under his nails, with small burns from the furnace. The hands of a programmer that had become the hands of a craftsman, not the hands of a warrior, not the hands of a hero, the hands of a man who fixes what is broken. Soyeon stepped forward. She held out a cloak. Doyun looked at it. Dark blue, with silver embroidery along the edge, with a lining impregnated with a protective compound. Beautiful. Doyun shook his head. He took an apron from the wall. That very one, the old one, worn out, with a cider stain on the pocket. The one Soyeon had sewn for him in the second month. The first thing she had ever made for him. He put it on, tied the ribbons at the back. Soyeon watched, and in her eyes was something that cannot be described in words. Doyun turned toward the door.
He went out. The square was empty. The townspeople had hidden themselves. The shutters were closed, the doors were locked. The town had frozen. Like an organism infected by a virus. Quiet, tense, in anticipation. The city gates were open, not because the defenders had decided not to resist, but because Vale had sent an ultimatum. Open the gates. Hand over the heresy of the 99 systems, or face an assault. The city council opened the gates. An army stood beyond them. 10,000 men in white robes with the symbol of the unified system embroidered in gold. Ranks standing in perfect order, shining weapons, white banners with a golden circle in the center. Inside the circle was a rune signifying the number 1. 1. One person, one system, one god, one law. At the front, riding a white 2-horned horse, sat a man. Tall, upright, gray hair down to his shoulders, a neat beard, gray eyes, calm, cold, but not evil, not cruel. Convinced. The eyes of a man who knows he is doing the right thing. In his right hand, a staff, long, white, with a golden pommel in the shape of that same rune. 1. Augustus Vale, Grand Master of the Cult of the Unified System. Doyun stepped out into the middle of the square, alone, in an apron, with flower on his sleeve, unarmed, unarmored, without an entourage, without dramatic music. He simply stepped out and stood there, small, skinny, wearing glasses he'd found at the market 2 weeks ago because his eyesight had deteriorated from constantly working with tiny interfaces. In worn-out boots that Soyan had repaired 3 times. The wind blew from the south, warm, smelling of dust and iron. Vale looked down at him from his horse. Doyun looked up at Vale. "You are the one they call the heretic of the 99 systems," said Vale. His voice was deep, steady, cultivated. The voice of a preacher, the voice of a leader, a voice accustomed to being listened to. "I am Han Doyun," Doyun said. "I am not a heretic. I am a system administrator." Vale frowned. The words were unfamiliar to him. Doyun raised his hand and reached out, not toward his 99 systems, not toward the gray line, deeper, further, toward what lay beneath all the systems, beneath all the classes, beneath all the skills and levels and progressions, toward the network itself, toward its core, toward what pulsed beneath the world like a heartbeat. He reached further than ever before, past his own systems, past the city's systems, past the thousands and thousands of people's systems in the square and beyond the walls. Deeper, to where the code was ancient, millennia old, written in a language he recognized, and the network responded. It responded like an old server that had been waiting for a ping for 1,000 years. Slowly, heavily, with a creak, with errors, but it responded. A window unfolded over the square, not small, not like a player's status, huge, across the entire sky.
From horizon to horizon, translucent, blue, visible to everyone, to every person in the square, to every soldier behind the walls, to every citizen behind closed shutters. It was the status of the network of systems, complete, unfiltered, unvarnished, unembellished, raw. Red error lines, hundreds, thousands, yellow warnings, tens of thousands, flashing overload indicators, memory leaks, version conflicts, unhandled exceptions, outdated modules, missing dependencies, data corruption, fragmentation, degradation. Thousands and thousands of lines. The network was sick, seriously, for a long time, fatally. The crowd froze. 10,000 fanatics stared at the sky with their mouths agape. Grunts, officers, support mages, healers, everyone. They were seeing this for the first time. None of them had ever seen the network from the inside. To them, the network was a god, invisible, omnipotent, perfect. And now this god hung above them, naked, sick, dying, with red error lines multiplying before their eyes. Vale turned pale. The staff in his hand trembled. He sat on his horse and looked up. And Doyun saw something breaking in his eyes. Not faith, no. Vale's faith was strong. The world was breaking. That picture of the world he had been building for 3 years. A perfect system, a divine order. One man, one system, everything in its place. And now this order hung over him in the sky, and it was red. Flawed, broken. Not because of heresy, not because of the guy with 99 systems, but because of time. Because of 1,000 years without maintenance. Because of entropy that waits for no one. Doyun stood in the middle of the square, small, thin, in an apron covered in flour. And he spoke, calmly, steadily, in complete silence so profound you could hear the wind rustling the banners. "Your God is broken," he said. "I am not the enemy. I am not heresy. I am not a threat. I am the one who can fix this. If you let me work, if you let me do what I know how to do, in 5 years, all of this will be green." He wasn't shouting. He wasn't reciting Hacha. He didn't strike a heroic pose. He just spoke. The way he spoke to clients, the way he spoke to Yuna when explaining yet another conflict to her, the way he spoke to Celine when repairing her sword. Calmly, simply, to the point. On the roof behind him stood Celine, with her sword drawn, with eyes full of something she couldn't name.
And for the first time in her life, she was smiling in public. Not hiding, not turning away, just smiling. Next to her was Yuna, with fire in both palms, 6 meters of flame clenched into 2 fists. She was screaming at the top of her lungs. "Come on, boss!" On the roof of the neighboring house, Madeline, on her knees, hands clasped. Her eyes were closed, her lips were moving. She was praying. Not to the god of the unified system, not to the network. To that skinny guy in an apron in the square who once made her tea and asked how she was doing. Next to her was Soyeon, small, quiet. She stood there and cried, not out of fear, not out of grief, out of something else. She wiped her tears with the edge of her apron, the very one she had sewn for him, and through her tears she looked at the workshop sign she had embroidered in gold letters. Workshop 99th. Her letters, her hands, her class. On the neighboring roof, Iris, in the shadows, almost invisible, a 6th-level shadow. She held a communication crystal in her hand and spoke quietly into it. "I'm staying with him. Tell whoever you want. The Magister, the Council, anyone. It's already decided." She turned off the crystal, clenched it in her fist, and for the first time in a long while, she felt she was on the right side. Hale stood in the workshop doorway. She looked up, at the network status, at the thousands of lines, at the red indicators, at the yellow warnings. And she saw, among the thousands of lines, one. Hers. Her entry in the archive. Not insane, not broken, not an anomaly. A 4th-level archivist, keeper of the memory of 2 worlds. The link between what was and what will be. Tears streamed down her face. Quiet, light, tears of relief. Augustus Vale sat on his horse. The staff in his hand no longer trembled. He lowered it, slowly. Not in defeat, as a sign of something else. He looked up at the sky, at the red lines, proof that the world he had defended for 30 years was crumbling. Not because of heresy, not because of one guy with 99 systems. Because of time. Because of a code that was 1,000 years old. Because of a god who was not a god, but a program. Vale did not give up. That would have been too easy. 30 years of faith don't crumble in a single minute. But for the first time in 30 years, he fell silent. For the first time, he stopped. For the first time, he looked at the man in front of him not as an enemy, but as... he didn't know what exactly. Doyun stood in the square for another minute. The silence rang out. Then he turned around and walked back. He just walked. No dramatic turn, no last glance, no parting words. He just turned and walked to the workshop. He opened the door, went in, took off his apron, hung it on the hook by the door. The same hook, the same apron. He sat down at the table and spoke into the empty room. "When's dinner?" The door behind him opened. Salen entered, quietly, her sword sheathed. Behind her, Yuna, the fire extinguished, her hands in the gloves Soyeon had sewn. Behind her, Madeline, a smile, warm, genuine. Behind her, Soyeon, eyes red, apron wet with tears, but shoulders squared. Behind her, Iris, without the communication crystal. The crystal lay somewhere on the roof, shattered. Behind her, Hayil, quiet, strange, with eyes that looked calm for the first time. 6 girls stood in the workshop doorway. They looked at him. Doyun looked at them. Then he said quietly, "Okay, I'll cook." Yuna said she'd chop the vegetables. Celine said she was cutting the meat. Madeline said she was setting the table. Soyeon said she would sew new napkins because they had stained the old ones with potion yesterday.